I actually hate when people go like, oh, it's just a lifestyle, because it's not. It's a business, and it's a critical business, in my opinion. Like I say all the time, like food security is national security.
So we're kind of neighbors. It's kind of funny. People in other parts of the country are like, oh, I have a friend in Montana. They got to be close to you, and it's like, yeah, well, you can drive 9 hours and still be in this state. So it's funny, we've both been in Montana, but we've never actually met before. Where's your ranch at?
Our ranch is just north of Martinsdale, Montana, kind of between White Sulphur Springs and Harlowton, are probably better known smaller towns.
Yep, Harlowtown. So my mom's, I think, great-grandfather like homesteaded 2-Dot.
Oh, get out of here. So we're right just west of 2-Dot. Just most people don't know 2-Dot, so I don't usually use it as the reference point. But yeah, we're right just down the road to the west.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah. No, my wife's or my mom's I think my great-grandfather built the 2-Dot bar.
Is that right?
Yeah, because my mom as a little kid lived in the top of it. I think for a short time.
Which great classic.
Yeah.
Like the fun part about those places is there's a lot of bars now that are like trying to be, kind of divey or whatnot.
Right.
Like, not that those are divey, but they're just your like classic Central Montana,
old school
bars where, people buy you drink chips and you see all the same people, and you go in there and you honestly, like you see people you haven't seen in a while, and it's like great catch-ups, great visits. And we know a lot of people that live in that 2-Dot area, and it's like amazing, just great, cattle raising ranch country with these like awesome small towns that pretty much all have some sort of classic watering hole that are always a good time.
I have a cool photo in my old shop next door here that it's my it'd be, I think, my great grandfather with my grandfather standing next to him, and he's probably 6 years old at the time, my grandpa, and they had a butcher shop there, meat shop, and in 2-Dot, and my great grandfather standing there with my grandfather as this little kid, and there's a knife laying on the butcher block right there, and I have that knife in my shop.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean, it's probably it's over 100 years old. It's pretty cool.
Huh?
You can tell that thing's been cut a lot of meat back in the
say,
day. But yeah, I always, if I could have the gift of anything, the gift of time travel would be to go back, like in those days when they're settling a place like 2-Dot, the middle of nowhere. The settlers, the 49ers, the gold miners in Alaska. Time travel of all different periods would be unbelievable to see how tough those people were.
Yeah, I mean, there's I want to say my number might not be exact, but there was 54 homesteads up the county road that the ranch is on. And there's still obviously like remnants of all those places. The old post office is on the ranch. The school that serviced that area was on the ranch. And you see where those people built and set up. And it's so much different than where people build houses now, where all of those, and those winters there are really tough.
Yeah.
It's just tough country. And to build and homestead those things out from nothing. And you just see all these really cool homesteads that are like down in these bottoms and super well protected. And then, you drive around and you see these new houses on top of
top of the hill.
Yeah. And they just get wind blasted. And you can just see, it's really interesting to go look in those buildings and just, how well constructed they were, and just to see that history. But I'm with you. Like if you could go back and see what that looks like, because you look at thank you so much.
I lost my coffee, Mac. I don't know if it's on that. Mac just brought Greg some coffee. Is it on that table over there? Sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
Yeah. There was actually one that I happened across. I have some cool photos. I should give them to Henry to put over the top of this. But when I was out hunting in the breaks, I happened along an old homestead that's right down it's up from the river just a little bit out in the Missouri River breaks there. And it was dug into a hillside, and it's like one small room, smaller than this part of the room that we're in right here. And then there's kind of a doorway that goes back, and the back part's dug into the ground. And you could tell that's where like their cellar was, where they kept their food and whatnot. And you can tell why and same thing, like you say, built down in a little coulee, protected up against the hill. Because like spray foam wasn't a thing. Spray foam insulation and, you know, the protection and also not being, you know, super, super exposed. You could ride by that place on a horse and never see it. Mm-hmm. You know, whether they were worried about, you know, Indians or anyone else coming along or whatnot, you know, they were able to be pretty hidden. But you see all the handmade nails and all the hand-hewn logs, the way they put that stuff together. And the tin was all like, on the roof was all like bent around the, like what would be the fascia, mm-hmm. you know, and you could tell they were catching rainwater for fresh water. And all I can think is like, they probably raised a family in that teeny tiny little cabin. There was an old, like wood cook stove in it. Super low ceilings, you know, if you were 6 feet tall, you were too tall for that building.
Yeah, for me, it works out good being short when you walk in there. But, you know, it's funny when you, like you said, you go in there and you walk through these buildings and you can really see, you can almost feel kind of what that must have been like or why they built what they did. And it was only the necessities too. So you would have, you know, there's these neat old barns, but all that wood, you can tell that those guys, you know, hand cut, everything. And
to go 2 feet taller would have been a ton more work, a ton more lumber. Probably would have been another month of work.
Yep, more space to heat, you know.
And where I was at, there wasn't a bunch of timber around it. Like they had to have brought that wood in from quite a ways away. I mean, it's really kind of scrubby or brush. You know, there wasn't good wood to just cut and build a cabin out of close. And then you think about the materials, like the tin, like that all had to have come in on a barge, mm-hmm. on a boat somehow on the Missouri. You know, or they would have had to haul it by wagon from like Great Falls or Billings, back in those days. I mean, again, out in the middle of freaking nowhere.
And I mean, you think about all the creature comforts we have today with being out in the elements, and then you think about what those people had at the time, and there's times where you're out there with the best gear, the best gloves, and you're still cold. Yeah. And what those people did, and just the perseverance and the grit that they had to go into those places and homestead them, it's still every day when you see the remnants of those places, it is just this like really stark reminder of what it took to put those places together at that time. And it's really interesting too when you see these places that have been running since that time. Yeah. And just the sustainability of those ranches and those businesses and those families. And just what a neat history to go back and, you know, for you to go back that far into these really, in my opinion, like super unique places that you just don't find that sort of history like you do with that stuff. And it's really neat.
Imagine, like I look at like Lewis and Clark. Imagine if you came to your wife and you were like, hey, I was just over in Frenchtown. I talked to Josh and Trevor and me and 4 buddies. We're going to row up this river in Alberta, and we think it goes all the way to the Arctic Ocean. We're going to row up it, and I'll be back in 3 or 4 years. We're going to go map it. And we're going to row upstream through Indian country, grizzly bear country, whatever the unknown is at that time. Like, for them to row all the way up the Mississippi, the Missouri, upstream.
Yep.
Like, upriver. They're rowing and through hostile territory and not knowing what they're going to find. And to do that for 3 or 4 years, and then they get done, and a guy like John Coulter, when they're going back to St. Louis, goes, I'm gonna stay out here and do some more exploring. I'm gonna stay out here on my horse, you know, and you know, he finds Coulter's Hell, which ended up being Yellowstone Park. You know, and like you said, imagine being out in the elements, those trappers, guys like John Coulter, out on a horse in the winter, you know, wearing furs or whatever. And, you know, we watched the show alone. And basically, even the people that do the very, very best that win it are starving to death when they win.
Sure.
Like they're all in some form of a starvation. And it's basically who starves last.
And they have sleeping bags and stuff, right? I've watched that show a couple times.
100%. No, yeah.
So you imagine these guys in leather.
No, they're wearing Sika gear. They're wearing high quality boots, rain gear. They've come prepared.
Yep.
For the most part, they bring, you know, they've got a bow and some tools, which I'm sure those guys, obviously they start off with some of that.
Sure.
But not, you know, they're not wearing Gore-Tex.
No. And you can just imagine, just being in that country at that time with that, just how tough you had to be, honestly, just physically tough.
No trails, no roads.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe some game trails, maybe some old Indian trails or something like that. But, to just point your horse off in that direction and try to fight through whatever downfall you get. And, again, bears and then, injury, if you injure yourself.
Yeah. What do you, I mean, that could be it. Like what we would consider to be probably a relatively minor injury today.
Bust an ankle or something.
It would be, you
Game
break
over.
a leg, that could be it.
Yeah.
I think about that all the time. Even like driving out here today, you look at these different mountains and stuff. And I always point that out to my kids. Like, imagine before anything was here, you were tasked with just getting through that country, how you would even do it.
Did you come through Lincoln?
No, I didn't, because I was in Bozeman this morning, and then I drove up just on 90. But I've been through Lincoln a bunch.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up there, and Lewis and Clark Pass is just out on the edge of Lincoln there, up by Rogers Pass, and that where they came over the Continental Divide. And I've hunted up there. My buddy has a cabin up there. They have a ranch on the other side of the pass. And every time I've hunted up there, I go up to that sign where the Lewis and Clark Trail, where the pass is, and in theory, they were coming across it thinking that they were crossing the Continental Divide and going to see the ocean. And all they saw was the Blackfoot River Valley, the Bob Marshall Wilderness, the Mission Mountains, the Cabinet Mountains. I mean, you want to talk about deflating, and I don't know how long, and I actually need to, I've never read all the journals and all that. I'd actually like to dig into, the older I get, the more interested I get in that journey. But when they're trying to find the Northwest Passage and they come up over that hill and they think they're going to potentially see an ocean, and all they see is this country that we're sitting in now, holy shit, that has to be deflating.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen those mountains or those areas, I mean, that is rugged that front country.
Is
yeah,
rugged.
you get, I mean, in my opinion, the Missions are some of the most beautiful mountains. You get into Bob Marshall, I mean, that is big mountain country, and to come over and think you're going to see the blue ocean in the beach, and to see that and nothing in sight, just how potentially deflating, but also the fact that it didn't deflate them, and they said, hey, we're driving onward until we get to where we're going. But yeah, that would be
it's incredible.
It is incredible.
Yeah. So where did you grow up then?
So I was born in Eastern Pennsylvania, and I grew up there. And then I had a cousin that they're from Alaska, but he went to college out here in Missoula. And so I started coming out when I was, I guess it would have been my sophomore year in college, started coming out here. So early 2000s. And then I just really love this area. I'd spent some summers with them in Alaska. And then ultimately was Montana's pretty great. I'd done Alaska for, I was just doing this when I was in college, and then I came out here. I had worked in the outdoor industry and did some guiding and fishing and stuff in Alaska, and then got a little bit of experience, and then started doing that here in the summers. And then when I graduated college, I started doing that full time. That would have been 2000, I guess 5 is when we moved out here full time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So you went to high school all through in Pennsylvania, and then moved out. Where did you go to college?
I went to West Virginia University.
Okay.
Yep. And so then, like I said, in the summers, I was kind of just going and working at places, and I was just doing this outdoor guiding thing, just kind of because I like doing it.
What was your degree?
I got a degree in international business.
Okay.
From there, so just kind of a basic business degree.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, were you doing fishing guiding, or what were you doing up in Alaska?
Yeah, I was doing fishing stuff. So we did some more charter boat stuff, and then a bunch of fly fishing guiding type stuff. And then I kind of took the nice thing with Alaska is if you don't have experience guiding, it's a great place because they'll kind of hire. They used to. I don't know how it is anymore, but they used to hire guys because they needed people.
Yeah.
And so it was a great place to get started. And then I felt like I got some time under my belt where I could come out here and started working for a bunch of outfitters here.
Were you here in Western Montana?
Yeah, I was in Missoula.
Oh,
and
really?
then Northern Idaho. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So guiding down on the Bitterroot.
Yeah,
Blackfoot.
Yeah, it's fun driving around here, Blackfoot, Bitterroot, Rock Creek, Clark Fork, all that stuff. I pretty much, the fishing access here, I have put in at a lot of times. So it's fun to come back and see all those places. And
Yeah.
Missoula, obviously, it was just a great place to do that. There's so much water here, and I was fortunate I got to work for some like awesome outfitters here, and
Yeah.
we used to do like day and backcountry things on the Smith and a whole bunch of different places, and so it was awesome. It was super.
Yeah.
I just loved doing it. So the day I graduated, my wife and I weren't married at the time, but we moved out basically as soon as we could.
Right. So international business degree to become a fisherman.
Yeah. It was really made a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good use to the degree,
So what did you do after you were, how long did you guide? What'd you do after you were guiding?
Yeah. So I did that for a couple of years, and I didn't really have like a super set plan. I never really have, I guess. But I really enjoyed doing that. It was going really well. And more than anything, I was enjoying it. Ultimately I ended up joining the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
But that had been something that I'd always, wanted to do. And, probably because of how well and how much I was enjoying doing the guiding thing, I probably, I said, I'll probably do that for a year. Ended up being a couple years. And then I finally got to the point where, I really was like, hey, I'm either going to do this military thing and or not.
Right.
And I was getting kind of up there, and it doesn't sound old now, but at the time you start getting into your mid-20s, and, that just the opportunity to do that. And, at the time there was a lot going on just internationally from a military perspective. I had a bunch of buddies that, had joined, and,
why'd you choose the Navy?
My uncle had been a SEAL. My uncle, who lives in Alaska, and I'd spent a lot of time just with them. And what actually ended up happening was he took me to his, just like high schools and colleges have reunions, the SEAL teams do as well.
Yeah.
And so I was 18, and he took me to one of his SEAL team, Buds class reunions in Virginia Beach. And I remember going to that, and, they do all the, they've got guys shooting and jumping out of planes and coming out of the water and snipers and all these things.
Sounds all boring.
So boring, right? And I remember sitting there, and then we're going to these barbecues and stuff afterwards with these guys, and I was like 18 years old, right? Yeah. So I'm looking at these guys like
drinking and having fun.
Yeah, and I'm going like, holy shit! Like, I am a lad. I am a boy. Yeah. These were, there was, and I just remember going, it really planted the seed deep. Just seeing what that. Having, I guess, like a introduction to that community, but not, I guess, like more of like kind of your external introduction, like to really be able to sit there and just hear what these guys were talking about and seeing what they were doing. And it was something that really just resonated with me. And I grew up just doing outside stuff and shooting and, pretty much outside all the time. And
so at that age, you were, what was that?
I was 18.
01, 02?
Yeah. It was 2000.
So right before 9/11?
Yeah, it was right before 9/11 because I graduated high school in 2000. And so, it was that summer basically that I just graduated high school. So yeah, pre 9/11. And it just, for me, like, those skill sets have probably been the things that have come easier to me than school type skill sets. And, so there was probably part of me that was like, well, here's like an area that I might find success,
right.
as a career or whatever. And then, and I think at the time it was definitely probably the right, way to go. But, my folks really wanted me to go to college, and I went down that road. And then 9/11 happened, and, I had a lot of time where I thought like, I might just stop doing this college thing and just go do the military now.
Right.
And I think, looking back, I didn't love the advice. I think it was the right advice now, but my folks were like, hey, you started this thing, you need to finish it. And after you get done, college, basically on you do whatever you want. But, if you've started something, you need to see it through.
Probably the right parental advice.
Very good parental advice. Right. Yeah. But at the time when you're going, and at the time, I think a lot of people thought that was going to be a quick, like the opportunity was going to be gone. Yeah. Nobody saw that going the direction that it did.
I always say that, like, so I graduated in 99, so I'm a year older than you.
Yep.
And looking back on it, I always, like, I've wondered, like, why didn't I, because I never really even considered joining the military. Of course, I was kind of motivated with, like, my knife business I was doing. My parents had an excavation business I was working in. Like, I kind of had, like, my goals and my things set out of, like, I'm going to take over my parents' excavation business and make knives and hunt. And that was just kind of like, I didn't really consider anything else. And looking back at being that age, it's like, well, geez, how come I didn't raise my hand, or how come I didn't volunteer to help or whatever? And I remember like it was yesterday, I remember where I was at during 9/11, and all I remembered was thinking, you fuckers are in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going to come over there, our boys are going to come over there and basically clean house for 4 or 5 days and kill whoever the hell we need to kill. And you know, because I remember, like, the first Desert Storm was just like, dusted them, go over there, do our thing, come back. Like, it wasn't a big thing. So, like, it never even occurred to me that, like, I could in any way, like, help, or they needed help, or not that they needed me, but you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
It never occurred to, like, raise my hand, because like you say, the last thing that anybody would have ever thought was that, like, oh, we're going to be embroiled in this for the next 20 years.
Exactly.
That was never
and that's the thing, is you always feel like, you know, if you go, oh, I'm going to miss the boat. Right. And
that's what I would have thought if I'd have joined. I'd been like, by the time I get through training of whatever I go into, like, this shit'll be over.
Yep.
I know a lot of our friends that were already Rangers or SEALs or whatever, and they were all pissed off because they didn't get to go in on the invasion because they thought that was going to be it.
Yep. And if you were, like, in and trained up at the time, right, and you were kind of on that first, you know, but you're absolutely right. Like, and I think I probably had a similar, you know, thought process looking back. Like, well, if you're not already doing this now, it's going to be over so fast.
Right.
And then what are you going to do? And, you know, I think for me, the military always kind of resonated because I was not a kid that was like, oh, I want to do this, or I have a family business to go into on this. Right. Kind of all the opportunities that I saw were, like, things I wasn't super interested in. Mm-hmm. And the military was one of those that just, when that seed kind of got planted, it just never went away. And my uncle was somebody that I, like, had always, you know, looked up to, and just, he was just a neat guy. Like, he was a commercial fisherman in Alaska after he got out of the Navy, and he became a lawyer for the state and just did all these cool things. And I just remember seeing those pictures and, like, hearing his stories, and then going to that thing and just going, like, man, this is what just you know. And then we had my grandfather was in the Marine Corps, and we just had a history of I guess, like, military service in my family. And like I said, for me, like, those skill sets were things that just I like to do.
Yeah.
I didn't know exactly what it was going to be like, but when you see that, and so ultimately, you know, I got done college, I started doing, and I was like, oh, you know, I'll guide maybe for a year or two. And then that, you know, went a little bit further than that. You know, again, just because it was going really well, and I kind of had my own little business, and, you know, was working for all these people I really enjoyed, and was doing all these things you know, it was great. It was awesome. And then, you know, I kind of got to that point where, you know, I really had to, and then my wife and I, you know, were kind of looking at, like, hey, what's our, like, long-term going to be?
Right.
And
retirement.
You know, you just start thinking about, like, you know, if, you know, you're good. We weren't married at the time, but getting married, having kids, all that stuff. Right. And that's the direction we were kind of going.
Was she supportive of you going in?
She was. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it took, you know, I had kind of convinced her, you know, like, hey, we should move out here and do this thing. And that was going great, and we were really enjoying it. And then, you know, I remember we were sitting down in a, you know, I don't know if convincing her was the right word, but, you know, I was definitely pitching her on this idea of, like, oh yeah, I know this is going well, and I told you this is what I wanted to do, but now, like,
I'm going to ditch you.
I want to go look at this other thing. Right. And I was pretty serious about it. And I think she knew that. And then also, you know, just thinking through kind of, you know, what our just career, and like I said, I never was somebody that was like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that. Right.
Right.
And mainly it came down to, you know, the window was closing. I was like 25, 28 was the cutoff.
Yeah.
And so I said to her, like, hey, like, I don't even know if I'd had some injuries and stuff, you know, from high school and in college. And I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to be eligible. Right. Cause you never know. Luckily at the time, They needed guys in those areas. But, so I said, hey, let's just go down this path and just see where it goes, right? Like, let me go and even see if this is a reality. And then I just, it kept becoming more and more of a reality up until the point where at the time they basically had a contract that as a civilian, you could come right off the street and you would go to, basic training, and then you would go right to buds. And it was obviously on you. There was a number of like requirements you had to meet. And then, but they gave you a shot to go right into buds as your kind of first stop post boot camp. And that's ultimately what I ended up doing, was getting that contract. And then, collectively we made the decision to go down that route. And I remember the day, so I ended up shipping out of Spokane, Washington, was like the closest hub to fly out of, basically. And she packed up a U-Haul and drove south to San Diego. And I got on a plane followed by a bus to boot camp. And she kind of went down there and got us situated. And I went and got started on the path to becoming a SEAL.
Yeah.
And
how was buds for you?
It was when you're doing it, it's super hard, and when you're doing it, it's it's a challenge for sure. But looking back, like, it was awesome.
Did you have any particular phases that really challenged you, or you got rolled, or any of that?
I got rolled after Hell Week for I got hurt. Every phase has its challenges. It just depends on what's your challenge going to be. I mean, I had things where, like one of them, you have to tread water with these tanks on your back, and you keep your hands out of the water, and you can't put your hands under the water. And, God
damn, that sounds tough.
Well,
because I swim long enough for you to turn the boat around and come get my ass.
And that's it. Yeah. Well, like, I had buddies who were like 6'3" that were like, this is the easiest thing I've ever done. And me at like, a whopping, 5'7", 5'8" on my best day, it was miserable. And, there was everybody. I always tell people, like, if you can do, 1,000 push-ups, they'll make you do 1,001. Like, they'll find the thing that's your challenge that you basically mentally have to figure out a way to overcome if you're going to be successful. And I found it all to be like very challenging, but then looking back now, I mean, it was just an awesome time. The bonds you're making with like your buddies that become like lifelong friends, the challenges that you're going through and like what you're learning about yourself. And I wouldn't trade what I learned about myself in that process really for anything. Yeah. And I think it sets you up in the future to kind of have an attitude of, I can, if I truly want to do something and I prepare myself correctly, I can do it.
Right.
I have to figure out like the way to get there. But I think that when you all of a sudden like develop that attitude, it carries with you beyond that. And I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't done that. Right. Mainly from just, they will challenge you. The barrier of entry into those programs through those selection processes are extremely challenging for a reason.
Yep.
But then when you get out of those, and then you're surrounded by a bunch of other people that are wired like, almost identical. Like I always tell people, the SEAL team platoon spaces are great because it's a bunch of people that are pretty much just like you from all different backgrounds, but the overall like wiring is very similar. So like your jokes either kill it and everybody's laughing, or they're like crickets because you're basically, your audience is all very similar. Yeah. Sense of humor is very similar work ethics. And you almost get spoiled by that a little bit when you leave those communities, because truly all the people who make it through those processes have something similar. Right. And that it doesn't matter where you come from, if you come from a city or the, backwoods or whatever. I've worked with people, there's something inside of those people who, because they don't teach you all the little mental tricks and all the, human performance things, when you're going through that process. Right. There's something there that those people have inside of them that they're able to kind of tap into. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I think what that comes down to is just the ability to persevere through challenges. And for me, like being a little older, I was in my mid 20s. So I was like 26 when I actually like got going with the process. But, I'd been through some stuff in my life at that point to where, and I really wanted to be there. Like I didn't want to try buds. I didn't want to tell people I was a Navy SEAL. I wanted to do that job.
Right.
That was my only goal. It was like, I wanted whatever it takes to get to doing this job, real world, special operations, soldier, Navy SEAL. I was more focused on, on doing that job than I was ever making it through buds or, and I just really, I wanted to serve, this country in that capacity.
Yeah. Did you find Hell Week the second time to be a lot easier?
I didn't go through. I only went through once. Okay. I got hurt at the end, so I made it through, and then I got rolled at the end of it into the next class to heal up. So I only had to do it once.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I don't think I'd want to maybe have done it twice. There's people that do, and I'm like, good on you. Because what people don't understand is some people do, but Hell Week, some people think it's like this early week, and then when you're done, you're done.
Right.
Yeah, there's a whole, I think Hell Week is, and they may have changed it, but it was like the 7th week of training where, and then you've got, that's basically the barrier of entry then to say like, okay, now we think you have what it takes to do some more training. And Bud's training, they're selecting you the entire way through, first phase, second phase, third phase. But by the time you get into Hell Week, you're already, you've been getting your ass kicked for weeks, and you're going to get your ass kicked for the foreseeable future. And I think that's what the people who make it through that ultimately, the best advice I ever got, and that was, don't worry about what you just did. Don't worry about what's coming up, and just focus on what's in front of you and doing that. And I think that has carried over just as a life lesson, because you could easily be overwhelmed looking back, and you could easily be overwhelmed looking forward. And I could tell you,
I think that's what some guy was telling me. His mentality was get to breakfast, and then his next goal is to get to lunch.
Yep.
And then his next goal is to get to dinner. And it was just basically, he based it all meal by meal.
Yep.
It was just make it to the next meal, which then gave him a win. And it was an accomplishment, almost like celebrate that win within his mind, and then concentrate on the next meal. Instead of even days, he broke it down 3 or 4 times a day.
I had days where I broke it down to inches. There was days I had enough like mental fortitude to be like, I can make it to breakfast. And there was days I was like, I can run to that piece of seaweed, and then to the next one, and then to the next one. Yeah. And it really just depended on just kind of mentally where you were. Because it really, you have to have physically you have to be able to do this stuff, right? But you don't have to be some world-class. I saw, far better athletes than me quit, and I saw far worse athletes.
So it's interesting. I was talking, this is a couple of years ago, but I was talking with Terry Hewen about, because Terry ran, I think, the pre-buds program that they set up for a while.
Yep.
That kind of qualified you to get to buds.
Yep.
And the thought behind that was to actually decrease the failure rate of buds. They thought, well, we'll do some pre-selection stuff, and that'll actually make the rate and the training more efficient at buds, and we'll weed out some people. And he said, as a trainer, and I've talked to Andy Stumpf about this, those guys would basically place bets as the trainers on who they thought would like, all right, here comes this guy, his short little guy from Montana, like he's got no shot. And then here's this big freaking stud athlete dude. It's jacked, ex-college athlete, whatever, like, oh, he's going to be great. And Terry said it didn't matter the stature of a person, it didn't matter the amount of muscles or lack of muscle. Like he did say there is a certain amount of frame that you need to yourself. Like it's one thing to be a smaller guy, it's another thing to be a smaller guy that's also super light boned with no muscle.
Yeah.
Like you have to be able to carry a load. And like he said, those ones, like those are pretty easy to weed out. Like that guy might have all the drive in the world. He just physically is not.
And
built.
You see that happen, right? And like I always tell people, like you got to be kind of like an F-150, right? Like you got to be able to go a certain distance, but you still got to be able to carry a load. You can't be a Prius and you can't be a Mack truck.
Right.
There's this like happy medium that, especially through those processes, because all you have is yourself going through that. And sometimes, I think a lot of people, there is like a misconception that every special operations person is, 6'4", 250 pounds.
Yeah.
And
all the guys I've gotten to know, a bunch of, especially like in the SEAL community, a bunch of guys are more guys your size.
Yep.
Up to 6 foot.
Yep.
And we had, I had a few guys from Team 6 in here Friday night, walking through. They're up here doing some training, and they, the one dude's big dude.
Oh yeah, there's very big dudes.
And it's kind of caught me off guard because I'm actually more used to meeting guys that are the size of Trevor or Terry or yourself.
One of those guys that was here, I was texting with him, and he didn't tell me that they came here, but they were in Montana, and he was a guy that was in my boat crew in Hell Week, right? And like, so there's, and you do get this variation, but I think the misconception is you have to be this like super muscled, huge guy, where if you think about it, you're really carrying your own body weight through that selection process. So there is a happy medium there. There are guys that don't have the frame to be able to take it. And then there's guys that are too big and it puts too much stress on you. So you kind of get this like, pretty, like I said, I'd say like of average height, of average like athletic build. But the key thing there is that you don't have to come from some like super athletic background. There's just something, and you're right, like you can't determine who's got that thing inside of them that and ultimately what it is the ability to persevere through losing and not let that get to the point where, you get overwhelmed by your circumstances. And that's why you get these like very creative, warriors that don't so much get stuck on like, well, looks like we can't do it. It's like, no, we can try doing it this way. What about that? Oh, that didn't work.
And even Terry said through they've done, all these mental study tests, all these different things where they've tried to test guys and weed guys out. And even with the pre-buds program, and he said, even then you send guys to buds and their failure rate stayed pretty level.
Stays the same.
It just is what it is. And it doesn't seem to matter how much pre-work they do. You just can't judge that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, and I can tell you a million stories, but this is something that I always think about was we were doing this run one time where, you get these instructors that are really fast, and then, the further that the group gets spanned out, there's different levels basically of punishment along the way. And God forbid you're like not that fast of a runner and you're like falling back towards the back because like it's just going to be a miserable afternoon. And we were coming back, and there was a gate that we usually stopped at, and that was the end, right? So when you got there, like it was done. And this one day, this guy just keeps running. And so the whole group keeps running except for about 20 people. And they just go, no, like mentally, that's the end. Like I'm not going any further. And those 20 guys quit. The rest of the class runs down the beach, maybe 200 yards.
No shit.
200 yards. And they started stretching and basically doing yoga while those 20 guys watched that happen. They had 100% the physical capability to run another 200 yards. They mentally became like overwhelmed by their circumstance and thought, I don't know when we're going to stop. And probably the guys who didn't quit were like, well, I don't care when we're going to stop. I'm here regardless. Right. There's no, and I think that like that perseverance, that ability to overcome just mentally the challenge. And again, not looking at what you just did or what's coming up, but just focusing on what's in front of you and trying to do that the best you can has been something that's definitely carried with me, throughout my time in the Navy into, transitioning out of the Navy and in civilian.
I tell my kids all the time, and I don't care really what it applies to. I always tell my kids, it's like stacking grains of sand. And might be a corny analogy, but I always tell them, like, if you have a bucket, you throw a grain of sand in it, it means nothing. And you throw 5 more grains of sand in it, it also still means nothing. But you keep throwing those grains of sand in over time. One day you wake up and you throw grains of sand in, and it rolls off the top and falls out. And that bucket's full, And I think it's similar, like, and I'm not comparing myself in any way to what you guys have done physically, but like to start off, say, starting Montana Knife Company with the goals that we have in mind, and we're still like the bucket still only has like an inch of sand in it, from what I'm concerned with our company. But if I looked at just the entire task of what it was going to take to get to where my eventual goals are with this company, like it would be overwhelming, and we'd just not even try it.
Yep, 100%.
Because there's so many opportunities along the way for failure. There's so much unknown that it really is. Like, at times it's daunting. Like, at times I'm just like, Jesus, I don't know. But we just come in here every day and we just kind of keep building towards it. And I gave a big, long talk this morning in our meeting to our team about our goals and again, and I tell my kids, even if it's like working out, right? You go bench press one day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. Nothing was like really accomplished. Nothing was really gained. But you go bench press every day for a year, like, you're going to see a major difference. And it doesn't matter. It might be their homework. You know, like, if they do their homework well and they do a bunch of studying today, you know, may or may not affect something tomorrow. But if they do it every day for the entire school year, they're going to end up with straight A's. So it doesn't matter what it is, if it's a physical challenge, mental challenge, growing a business, you know, buying a ranch, you know, and the idea of building a ranch or whatever. It's that stacking of grains of sand of just pay attention to the grain of sand that's in between your fingers at that moment.
Yep. And getting it in the bucket. Right. And then, like, eventually, and that is all really, you know, Buds is every day you're putting your one grain of sand in the bucket, and then all of a sudden you're there. And, like, you know, you basically lose the whole time. Like, even when you win, there's some sort of, like, you get less punished than somebody else. But at the end of the day, then you made it, right? And there is big wins along the way, right? But you get to the end where you did it. But then what I love about that, and when, you know, what I still love about, you know, my job now, is that the day you show up, though, and you think, like, oh man, I did it. I'm a Navy SEAL. The day you walk in, like, you're quickly reminded that you're the least trained Navy SEAL on the face of the earth. You're lower than whale shit. And you walk in, and, like, once again, it's like you're always a new guy to somebody, right? And I think that attitude, though, is good to carry over in whatever you're doing, because, you know, there's probably a knife maker out there that looks at you and goes, man, Josh has only been doing it for so long. Yeah, he's doing a good job. But then there's guys looking up to you going, man, this guy is like the pinnacle, right? And I think just from like just in general, having like that kind of new guy mindset and just remembering that, like, the bucket can get kicked over at any point. And then, like, what are you going to do? Right. And that happens in business, that happens in life. And I think with my kids, like, one of the biggest thing, if they can take like one takeaway from me as their parent, it's, you have to have the ability to persevere through challenges. And the more that they do that kind of incrementally, and the more that they're able to put the, you know, the grain in the bucket every day, regardless of what the day looks like. And if the bucket gets kicked over, you start over. Right.
Right.
If they can learn that, they're not going to get steamrolled by like life's challenges, especially small challenges.
Yep.
And I see so many people today where just these not even, you know, minuscule issues become like these huge mountains where
you blow a tire on your car.
It ruins your day.
You don't have the money to pay for it at that moment. And then you just let that compound into a huge issue.
Yeah. It ruins your day. And, you know, and I think that's one of the things, like, you watch. Another interesting thing about like watching people go through like training and selection processes is that if you're doing, you know, different like target assaults and things like that, you know, what you could watch somebody have, you know, a bad room becomes a bad floor, becomes a bad second floor, becomes a bad building, becomes a bad day, becomes a bad week, and then you're gone.
Right.
Where if the guys that were really good could have a bad room, and it's not like they didn't think about it on the way home.
Right. Short memory.
They could shake it off, and the second room they went into, like, it was like the first one never happened. And then they had a bad, you know, they had a decent floor, a great top floor, a good building, and they were there the next day, right?
Right.
They learned from their mistakes. But they didn't let it, I'm not going to say they didn't internalize it.
Let it compound.
They didn't let it compound, and they didn't let it ruin their performance moving forward. They like took it on board, fixed it, and moved forward.
I always tell my kids, momentum is such a funny thing. And we actually saw it yesterday, and it's trivial. But my daughter's 8th grade volleyball team never lost a game last year, and they have never lost a game this year until last night. And the first serve of the game came right at my daughter. Terrible pass, off her arms, out of bounds. I think she made another mistake right away. Then another one of the really good, because my daughter and this other girl, kind of the two are better players on the team. That other girl made a mistake, and then you kind of saw their faces get kind of long, and then all of a sudden, like, they're down 8-0, and then they're down 10-2, And you could just see then everyone on the team started making mistakes. And, they didn't really, they kind of almost flushed that one away because game 2, they almost came back and won. But there again, they lost that one and they ended up losing this match. But I told my kids when I was watching it, the momentum, and you see it in all, and that's why I think sports are so good for kids is how do you shake off that first bad 4 or 5 points and rally back and have that grit to come back and win? And how do you see your teammates struggling and not allow that to affect you, and now you begin to struggle instead of picking them up? They could have used a few teammates to help pick them up. And it's momentum is a really, really interesting thing because it also works in the other way when things start going really well and whatnot. But I just think the life lessons, whether it's sports, business, whatever, they're also intertwined and so similar. Yeah. And I love what you were saying. When I became a lineman, I went through an apprenticeship. It's a 3.5-year apprenticeship. And a lot of guys say that the lineman world is about as close to the military feel as you can have outside of the military, where it's a brotherhood. Your lives are literally in the hands of your guys around you. There's a lot of communication involved when you're in the bucket truck and you're around, 7,000 to 100,000 volts up in the bucket, and you're counting on your teammate in the bucket to tell you, hey, Greg, watch your head. Hot wire behind you, coming hot, coming on, like all this communication that's happening, and you're trusting, or I tell you, Greg, that wire's dead. You can go ahead and grab it. Like, I have to trust what you say.
There's a lot of trust. Yeah.
There's so much trust that goes on there. And during your apprenticeship, you're just a piece of shit. Yep. And you're treated a lot of times even maybe beyond unfair. And a lot of that's designed just to see, like, how are you going to react? Are you going to explode and say, fuck you, and lose your mind, throw your hard hat and walk off the job? Or are you just going to eat your shit sandwich and go clean the truck and let it roll off your back and just keep moving forward with the task? And
nobody wants to see how you are after you win, right?
Right.
Everybody wants to see how you are after you lose or when you're not at your best, right? Because that's kind of when your true colors.
Yeah, if I rip your ass in front of your 4 closest friends, how are you going to take that ass chewing?
Yep.
And are you going to be super defensive, get offended, blow up? Are you going to cry? Are you going to fight? Are you going to cry? Or are you just going to kind of bite your fucking tongue and move on and either improve what you were doing, fix what you were doing, or maybe it was completely unfair and it was just a test.
Yeah.
But it shows everyone around you a lot about who you are. But it's interesting. You get all through that and you kind of want to kill your foreman. By the time you turn out, you're like, I'm going to turn out when I have that journeyman ticket in my hand. I'm going to go beat some guys' asses.
Yeah.
But it's funny, you walk in and you're like, I'm a journeyman lineman, and you walk in the room and you go on the next job and you're still kind of treated like an apprentice because you haven't built any trust yet. You're now a journeyman. You are treated different. You are treated a little bit better, but you're not just turned loose on your own.
Yeah.
You're not ready to go run the service truck all night long by yourself and troubleshoot shit and not, the linemen aren't going to come to the job in the middle of the night and trust everything you have to say just yet. Like, you're not a proven lineman. You have that ticket, but it still doesn't mean shit. And I think I've heard that with the SEAL stuff, it's so similar. You report to your team, you walk in the door, and it's Greg, go clean the bathroom.
Yeah. No, you walk in, you're the least trained guy. You're the new guy. You're
the liability.
Yeah. You're putting your, trident in a cage and you're getting it back when the guys who've been doing the job for a long time feel like you're ready. Right. And that goes all the way through, but you're always going to be looked at like that by somebody. And I know, I don't know that. So like super close family friend of mine, who basically like taught me to hunt when I was a kid. Like I've been archery hunting since I was like 11 or 12, but this like super good family friend of ours who was a lineman, journeyman lineman, like in watching him go through his career. And still to this day, like he's like one of those guys that literally I've never seen him YouTube a single thing. He can fix anything. He comes up to the ranch all the time. It just like, you go like, hey, this truck's broken. And just the amount of knowledge that this guy has, but watching him, his whole career as a lineman. So I know a little bit about it. I've never done it myself, but just, but yeah, it's absolutely, you have the skill set, right? They're the foundation,
right? But
you got to build. And that goes back to, again, like starting businesses to, going to school, to whatever you're doing. But I think the biggest thing is how do you react, right, when it doesn't go your way?
Right.
How do you react when you walk in there that first day and they go, yeah, that pin that you just spent 2 years earning, why don't you go ahead and take that off?
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and put it here until we say you've earned it, right? But then there's a lot more meaning and value to it when you get it from your peer group and from your community than when you still earned it, right? But there's a much different feeling to when they do say, hey, you know what? Hey, Josh, you take the truck tonight. And when you come back and go, this, and this happened, and the guy goes, oh, okay, cool. And you can see the trust building, and you can see your skill set getting better. And then you get to the point where you look back and you realize that first day you walked in, how little you really did know.
Right.
And I think the
100%.
ability to go like, man, like, and I think to have that, we call it like the FNG attitude. And that is an attitude that will serve you well in whatever you're doing, because
what's FNG?
Fucking new guy.
Okay.
So you walk in and you're the FNG, you're the fucking new guy. And there's some leeway there, right? Like, because you're the new guy, the expectation is like, you're not going to be perfect at everything, but you should be striving. And
it's their job to put you in a position where you can succeed.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you want to find somebody that you feel like is a stellar performer and be like, I want to be like that guy.
Mentor.
Yeah. Right. And then you start, trying your best, but you have to be able to correct and get better, but you also have to realize that the skill set that you have is just the foundation. And I think that's important in whatever you're doing, because it keeps you from if you have that kind of new guy mindset all the time, regardless of where you are in your career, it's going to keep you wanting to get better, learning new techniques, building, growing on top of that foundation, and never getting to the point where you're like, man, I've got this figured out, right? Like because that is the attitude.
That's when you get bit.
It's when you get bit. That's like when, like, what do they say? It's like, be humble or get humbled, right? And and you know how it is. I mean, starting businesses, running businesses from nothing. There's days where you probably feel like, I know I do. I'm like, man, I think this is going to work.
I think there's some stat I heard, and I don't probably have it exactly right. I'm not going to be quoted on this, but like the average age or the average number of years that linemen that get killed in the line of duty have served is over 20 years. And it's because of like that complacency, the lack of applying the safety controls, the testing the wire to see if it's dead, or adding the extra piece of cover. Just that, like, like going into knock down a house potentially or whatever, and if you've done it for 20 years and it's just like, this is an op just like every other one I've gone through, versus the new guy that's hyper vigilant, hyper aware, and I can't really compare it to the SEAL world, but I know with the lineman stuff, you can get very, very complacent.
Well, you get away with it once, right?
Yeah.
You do it once and you go, I know, but nothing happened.
Right.
And then you do it again. And then all of a sudden,
you don't clear the room exactly the right way with the right techniques. And
what was interesting though, and another story that like I just think about a lot, even right now, is I was working for this guy who had been doing it at like the highest level for a really long time, and we were doing a job, and the tides just kind of changed, not in our favor. And I remember he was like, "Hey, we're out of here." And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, here's this guy. I mean, I was thinking like, oh, these guys are going to want to go like really get after it.
Right.
And I think, so when we got back, I was like, man, like what was, and he was like, oh, if the odds aren't in our favor to win, I'm not playing. Right.
Yeah.
Here's a guy that had enough experience to not care what anybody thought. If that had been a younger, newer guy wanting to kind of prove themselves, there may have been,
let's fucking roll him.
Let's do it. But probably at the expense of somebody getting hurt or killed.
Yeah.
This guy had seen it so much. All he cared about was winning.
Yeah.
Not at, and at the expense of even somebody being like, oh man, like, you waved off on that. And that has stuck with me, that lesson, and his confidence in the skill set that he knew. He'd seen it so many times and hadn't cut those corners. And
that's an age thing for sure, and an experience thing, because that's very similar to, we always took pride in not killing people's power. Like, we can fix shit hot, and we can keep everyone in power, and it's kind of like this. It's a pride, ego, whatever, but like, you know, shit's gone completely south, but if we kill the power, we're gonna have to kill maybe 500 more homes to fix this, or 20 more homes, or whatever. And it's like, the young guys are like, we can get that pull in there, or we can get that wire transferred fine, and like, and sometimes there had to be that old foreman that would step in and be like, we're killing the fucking power. Like, like I'm not. And I remember I had one of my linemen, Doug Amos, tell me one day, he goes, I refuse to go to your wife's house and tell your wife and your kids you died on my crew. Because he said, I've already had to do that.
Yeah.
And he told me about walking up and the little kid running up to him, asking him if he, where's my daddy? Did you bring my daddy with you? And Doug was walking up there to tell the wife what happened.
Yeah, you do that once or twice or more times, and it'll make you think real hard about, again, where are those decisions coming from? Sometimes it's coming from a point of, well, I got to do that because I'm going to prove this, right? But if you really, in those lessons, and that lesson in particular, just because of the level of experience that this particular guy had, and I was completely wrong about what I thought they were going to do. They did the opposite, and it really made me think. And then it made me think about other situations that I'd been in with people that were less experienced, that were kind of rushing
little
to
gung-ho.
Yeah, and you almost have to have that, but avoiding those, complacency traps, I think it's really important. And when you watch the people who have done it for a long time, the people who don't cut those corners and do it right every time are the guys and gals that generally don't have those like catastrophic failures at those levels. But it's really hard because we all do it.
It's an intangible, and it's just, there's such a fine line there between being scared of your job, being scared of the possible consequences, and being hesitant, which as a lineman, there's no such thing as the hesitancy thing. You can hesitate all you want. Like, it's better to hesitate and really think twice. In the job you were doing, hesitation can also cost lives.
Absolutely.
So that's definitely where there's a difference, where we can hesitate and talk about it for hours until we want to make a decision. Usually that was where, if everyone was hesitating too much, that was your answer.
Sure.
Fucking kill it.
Yep.
Like, we're not coming up with an answer quick enough here. It's clearly too risky.
Yeah. And there's times I tell my guys now where I'm like, hey, if there's some task that needs to be completed, I'm not saying it doesn't need to be completed, but let's not do it a certain way that's going to like rush into somebody basically, getting hurt, or rush into a bigger problem.
Right.
If there's another way, or like maybe we need to come back tomorrow when we're, better suited to win. Right. And, that is something that I think about a lot as I, whether it's, kind of helping like mentor like new managers, and just thinking about our business, and thinking about like, are we being strategic enough where you should want to go in there and just like crush whatever that opponent is. And I think that's that like commitment to success, where like, it's not always perfect. Right. And there are days, like I was saying, like I have days where I wake up and I'm like, man, I think this is going to work. Like, I think the business is going to work. And then I've got days where I go like, there's no way this thing's going to work. Like, this could, and you go through, but
it's the same. It's the same. And a lot of people might wonder how like these, stories of combat, or stories of, linemen can potentially relate to business. And to me, it's the same way with our business. Like, I hesitate every day, or like have the decisions every day of like, part of me wants to rush in, like borrow a shit ton of money and be like, man, we're growing. Like, this thing is going to be the biggest freaking knife company on the planet. And we're going to just borrow all we can borrow, and we're going to go after it. And we're going to just dive straight into this. And then there's other days where I'm like, holy shit, I don't want to hire anymore. I don't want to do I don't want to even, it's like almost paralyzing, the stress of like not wanting to make those moves or any moves, because you're afraid of failure. Right. And so it's like this weird combination and intangible thing where you have to have an intuition of what you think's right and wrong,
and like when to go at it hard,
Yep.
and when to, because I think there's also a problem of kind of the analysis paralysis, right? Like there's got to be an action point. And I think people that are, good entrepreneurs, good at running other businesses, are people that get enough information to make the right decision, but don't rush into it.
Right.
To where, because, and there's a lot of pressure, like when you've got payroll and you've got a lot of people and their families that are counting on you.
Yep.
And, it's on you to make those decisions, and you can't be so slow to make them that you don't do anything, but you can't rush into them.
Right.
And I think, you just see so much like I tell people all the time, between like the military and production agriculture, there's just so many parallels that those lessons learned go both ways. And you see just so many similarities between, number one, like the type of people that are doing that and the type of jobs that those are, but also the decision-making matrix and the ability to actually kind of tell when maybe the momentum or the snowball is rolling in the wrong direction. And what are you going to do to break that thing before it gets too big?
Turns into an avalanche.
Exactly. And I think that's something that people that come from those backgrounds, where I like call them, they're consequence-based jobs.
Right.
If you don't do those jobs correctly, there's a very real consequence, and it's not somebody sending you an email and telling you, or somebody yelling at you.
Right.
There's a real consequence to not doing those correctly. And I think a big thing with those types of jobs is it forces you to recognize like when the momentum is in your favor and when it's not. But if you don't have a good gauge of where you're at in that cycle to make like big decisions at that point.
Right. What was your specialty then? What were you trained for in the SEALs to do?
So I went to SV Team 1 in Hawaii to start out with, which is like heavily a reconnaissance-based team. I was a sniper. I was a comms guy. I went to, dive soup, like those sorts of schools and whatnot. And so I spent a number of years there, and then I went to the East Coast. I worked in the training command for a while over there, like teaching other guys. I'd gotten hurt in Hawaii. So I worked there training guys for a little bit, and then
How'd you get hurt?
I got hurt diving. It was kind of a weird deal. I basically got the bends, but then as part of that, there's like a membrane between your left and right ventricle and your heart that I'm pretty sure I tore it doing that stuff because I'd never had any like issues before. But anyway, I had basically a bubble go through that, and then got the bends from that. So I had to get that fixed, my heart fixed. And then I had to recover because it took a little bit to figure out like kind of what was going on. And so in that process, I moved to Virginia Beach and got that done there. And then I worked in the training command, and then I went to another command there for a few years. And then I got out in 2017. So I did about 10 years between the active duty and the reserves. But my job was always like more like small team kind of reconnaissance based stuff is I kind of started out down that path and kind of just stayed down that road.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome.
What was that decision? You at that 10-year mark, you're kind of at that point where it's like if you re-up and go any longer, then you might as well, then you're doing 20.
Yep.
What was that decision to get out?
Yeah, there's a couple things that had done it or that played into it for sure. We'd had 3 kids in the process. My time in the Navy was awesome. Like I look at that as like, I look back at it as some of the working with like the absolute best people. Just I loved it. And it was going really well. And a big thing was just the family stuff, and then looking forward and going, okay, just here's the jobs that I've done. Like, is there more things out there like that? Is this kind of like, is the momentum, going in the direction you want it to? Just work-wise too, like what commands are going to be available. Basically for me, there was like one particular command I really wanted to go to, that came off the table. And when that happened, I kind of just started looking at, what I had done, what I kind of saw my opportunities. But the biggest thing was we'd had 3 kids in the process, and it ultimately came down to like where we wanted to raise our family.
And you were still married.
I was, yeah.
That's not, it's really amazing when you think about the stress on a relationship when you're super young, you move to Montana and you're doing the fly fishing stuff, and then you're changing, going to the military, and you're moving to Hawaii, and you're moving to Virginia Beach, plus you're deploying, like,
Yep.
The time spent away, like that's, you beat the odds by being able to stay married,
Sure.
to still be married today. Like that's a tough, a lot of guys can't make it through that, which says a lot about your wife.
My wife's the same. Like she puts up with, all my crazy stuff. And has been I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without her help and support.
Mhm.
And yeah, so we got married. It was actually kind of funny. We got married between Buds and SQT. We had basically like one weekend. We had to cancel like 4 other dates. And then I went to Alaska for like 3 or 4 weeks the following Monday. Our honeymoon, I was going to SDB school in Florida. So we were going to drive from San Diego to Florida and go to some fun cities along the way. And then a bunch of my SEAL team buddies ended up, they were like, well, we'll come to one stop. And then literally came with us the entire way. And it turned out to be a great trip. But it was like every stop along the way, they're like, oh, yeah, we'll go to that next spot.
Do you still owe her a honeymoon then?
I pretty much do. Yeah. Yeah. We haven't got that one checked off yet. But yeah, so we got, so all through that. And then, the biggest thing came down to just like where we wanted to raise our kids. And my kids, I'd still be in right now if, we kind of took that next jump forward. And I really wanted to raise our family out west. Montana was our like primary place we wanted to be, but I didn't want to come back with my kids when they were like, in their teenage years
right.
and
16.
I wanted them to grow up here. Like I remember my wife and I, we would go skiing before we had kids in when we first moved out here. And you'd see these tiny little kids just ripping down the mountain. I remember like we had this conversation once on a chairlift, like we want our kids to look like that. Right. And, so we just looked at the age of our kids and kind of, if we were going to do it, that was the time to do it. And, my enlistment was up. And like I said, I've always been really proud of like, I feel like I've left the other careers that I've had at kind of at highs, not ever for a reason of like, well, this sucks or like, this isn't going well, or there's not like great opportunities moving forward. And I think it's hard to one capacity, it's hard to do that, but it's also like you get to leave on kind of your terms to a certain extent. And it was a really hard decision for both of us, like a really hard decision.
Yeah. Cause you're leaving a guarantee. Your retirement, your pay, your benefits, like, it's like when I quit my lineman stuff, like around here, it's one of the best jobs.
It's a great job. Right. And it's hard to make that.
Yep. And you're bailing off into the unknown.
100%.
Like you weren't walking away into a contractor job that was like guaranteed or something.
No, not at all. And again, you want to talk about like, the pressure of having people who rely on you, a family, and, and now you're going to make another move, kind of again, not exactly sure. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I knew where we wanted to be. I'll be perfectly honest. Like I had this list of all the things like basically we needed to do to get here. And I mean, from selling your house to finding a job, to getting the family out there, to all these things, right? Where are we going to go? How are we going to, and I remember we got out here and I remember like we're all here and my mom was there and like we sat at the table and I had this list and I pulled it out and like read through it. And at the time, like we were talking about before, you could easily have been overwhelmed by all of that. Right. But it was like, each grain of sand in the bucket added up to us. And I will say, that transition out of the military is really hard. Mainly because you leave this group of people that is just, it is just such, it's hard to even describe.
Well, it's like that loss of that family connection.
100%. It's all your friends. It's like it's your family. Like when we lived in Hawaii, like our friends were our family because nobody else lived out there. So, you're talking holidays, weekends, everything you're doing with these people. And again, just in some of the greatest friends I'll ever have and still have. And I'm just so fortunate to have like been a part of that community and the people, like they push you to be better. Right. And some of those things still the way we run our business today and like the people we hire is you want to be surrounding yourself with people that are better than you. Like I won't hire somebody that doesn't bring a skill set that's better than all of ours in some capacity, right? But you learn all these things, and I just feel like I know for a fact, like I wouldn't be sitting where I am today if I hadn't done that. The opportunities I had were, the people I got that I still get to interact with. Mm-hmm. I can't say enough positive things about that experience. So leaving that into kind of this unknown was really hard. And people tell you like, oh, this transition is hard. It's going to be hard. I will be the first to admit, like, I did not give it probably the attention. I was like, oh, I've done all these things, right? I've been a Navy SEAL, blah, blah, blah. And then you start to do that, and, you realize pretty quickly, what you've left, I guess. Because
the other thing that you're leaving that I don't think is talked enough about, especially with the challenge with suicides and all this stuff with veterans, is everybody talks about, the combat and all the injuries and that kind of stuff. But to me, it's also has to be, from what I've observed, the structure of it. Especially for guys that go in, like you before you went in, you kind of still like were involved in the real world with business and kind of having to make your way and stuff. But if you go in at 18, 19 years old, and for 20 years, your day is laid out and you're basically told what to do for 20 years, depending on what your job is in the military. Like there's so much structure around that, so much known, that then all of a sudden you step out and now it's all on you. No one's telling you what the next move is or where you're going to be or what time or whatever. It's got to be a major challenge to just be without that structure. Especially for guys that really need or just never experienced that. It feels like the special operations guys tend to work a little bit more loosely. Like, you guys, whether it's schedules or structure or whatever, but like, especially I think a lot of guys that are just really in a job and it's just like so structured.
They know the next thing, right? And the staircase is laid out in front of you.
Yeah.
This is what you have to do. And if you do that, you go to the next block, right? And you go on and so on and so forth. Obviously with like business, there's no, especially if you're starting new businesses.
Starting your own, yeah.
You don't know where that stair, there's no, hey, you've done this, and this. You could do it all right and it might not work, right? And I do think people get very like that structure there, it's laid out for you. Success is laid out for you.
And you can argue that too if you're just working in business. If you're not a member of the military, if you're working for the power company like it was,
same thing, right?
You are. It's 8 to 4:30.
Yep.
It doesn't matter really what happens during the day. At 4:30, you're done. You go home.
Yep.
And it doesn't, there's no ramifications on your personal life. And then next day you go at 8 and you go back to work.
Yep.
And it's that way with lots and lots of jobs. But when you're starting your own business, there is no structure. There is no playbook.
Yeah, and you're right. Like if somebody gave you the playbook and said like, hey, this is how you build a successful knife company. These are the steps. This is when you borrow money. This is when you don't. When you hit this, you do that.
Right.
You're figuring all of that out, and so am I.
Right.
And that, some people are not cut out for that. Like they are not cut out for the commitment it takes. And like one thing I will say about the military that I think is interesting, number one, not even on deployments, but just your training schedule from the, special operations community, is just so intense and you're gone all the time, but there's no like, oh, hey, like there's an option of going or not going. Right.
Right.
All of a sudden when you're a civilian and you're running, and probably, being a lineman was similar. It's like, this is the schedule. This is where I got to be. If there's a storm, you go. There's not a lot of like, do you really have to do that? Right. Then you're running your own business. The same level of commitment to be successful is there, but there's more like outward pressure of like, well, do you really have to go to work on a Saturday?
Right.
There's no set time of when you're on or when you're off.
Right.
And it at times, like, I don't know if you felt this way, but like there's exterior pressures of saying like, where before it was like, well, it's my job. Like I'm in the military, I'm a lineman. I have to go do this now.
Right.
And
yeah, Greg, do you want to go fishing on Saturday? And it's funny because like when I was a full-time knife maker, it was almost like people didn't consider that I had a real job.
For sure.
Like if you're a rancher, like, Well, you don't have to. I mean, you don't have to spray weeds today.
Yep.
Like we could go fishing. You could do it tomorrow. It's almost like, or I'll stop in and chat with Greg for 2 hours and have coffee.
Yeah.
It's weird because a lot of times when you have there's certain kinds of jobs that, as a rancher, you don't really have a job. You own a ranch, but
Yep.
you don't have to do anything. You set the schedule, but in reality, you understand you do have to do certain things, and you have to have discipline and force yourself to be like, hey, it's summertime. This is when there's a reason that there's the saying, you make hay when the sun's shining.
Yep.
Those are the times you do have to be disciplined and put 7 days a
I
week
think
in.
what's hard is you make the priority list, right?
Right.
And so then people kind of go like, well, you can change the priority list, right? But you're setting the pace, you're setting the schedule.
Right.
And there's challenges to that, right? There's like, well, why don't you just...
Well, and it becomes your life. I mean,
does.
that's what people don't understand about ranching, farming.
Any business,
if you
though.
don't enjoy it to a certain degree, and yes, almost any business, but if you don't enjoy it to a certain degree, you probably shouldn't be doing it because it is going to be who you are and what you do.
Yep.
And it's going to be what your kids do. It's going to be what your wife does, because it is those cows have to be fed every morning and every night.
Yep.
It's a 365-day commitment that you have to commit to.
Yeah. And when we started Little Belt Cattle Company, as you learn like all those different things that have to happen, again, back to like, there's consequences to the actions of doing or not doing, and they're real. Right.
Yeah.
And it just, I think to make a business start from scratch and work, the level of commitment that it takes to do that is some people are not cut out for it, right?
Right.
Because it does take precedent over birthdays and bedtimes and
right.
anniversaries and that's not easy, right?
Right.
And there's times where like you have to have, in my opinion, though, and it's probably not right the best way to be at times, but you have to be at that level of commitment to the success of that thing working to where there isn't a lot of balance.
But there's also some amazing benefits that other people in this world would just never get to experience,
For sure.
And the lessons taught with your kids, the time spent with your kids, frankly, the time spent, like maybe you're kind of forcing them to be out there on Saturday helping hay or moving water or doing whatever you're doing. But down the road, they'll look back and be like, man, they spent more time with their parents than most of their friends ever did.
Sure.
And they learned lessons that their friends didn't learn. It was that way with me with excavation when I was working for my folks, and I really enjoyed it. But I mean, in the summertime, like we worked.
Yep.
Because you only could make money from April to November. And then the rest of the time, ground froze up, we weren't working. And so it was a 7-day-a-week deal. And on Sundays, we took a little bit of time off, but generally we were maintaining equipment, maybe looking at jobs, like just kind of getting geared up for Monday. But
Yep.
It was for sure 6.5 days a week. And so we didn't go to the lake. We didn't go boating and fishing a lot and camping. We did a little bit more stuff, a little bit more in the winter, just because of the seasonality of it. And I think it's similar with farming and ranching, probably more so with farming with ranching than you're feeding cows and you're dealing with shit in the winter.
Yeah, it never really ends. I mean, do your kids come over here and help?
A little bit. They did more in the beginning. Now that we have so many employees, and they're just so busy with their sports.
Sure. But they watch you doing it, right? And
Yeah.
they have an understanding of what it takes to
In the beginning, my daughter Sadie at 14 was helping. I told all the employees this morning, she was helping grind all my handles.
Yeah.
In the very, very beginning of this, it was kind of all hands on deck.
Yeah, it's a family.
Yep.
But back to like what you were saying with work and, with your folks, did you find that to be, rewarding just the time you got to spend?
Oh, I loved it.
So
Yeah.
I don't know why, but like, I love working, like I like working with my wife. I like working with my kids. There's challenges there, but I think from like our family structure, the fact that we can go out and do, what could be like stressful work together and not be
Yeah.
screaming. But like my daughter and I, the other day, we had a bunch of neighbor cattle on us. It was Sunday morning and I'm like, hey, I need I need you to come help me, and we got to move these cattle off, and we got to sort, 2 of our own and take them back. And she's 10, and we went out there and had such a nice morning. We got our horses ready. We go out. I'm like, hey, I'll go get these gates. She's driving cattle. I come back. I'm like, hey, what's the holdup? She's like, I got a little bit nervous with that one bull. So I just held what I got, waited till you to come back. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's do this. And then she's working one side. I'm moving stuff. And we had a great time. But what was cool was like, she learned some stuff. I learned some stuff. But the cool part was like, we were working together.
Yeah.
And that's what, like, with your kid, and to have that time together, it's just something it's neat. And they're also,
that's that intangible that you can't measure that, you're not going to spend a lot of the time at the lake water skiing together, but that's one of those things that's really hard for other people to understand.
But you're doing things like, like I'll take my kids or my business partner's kids and we'll go to one of our partner ranches, and, we'll brand calves for 3 days, and they'll sleep and live out of the horse trailer with one of their best friends or their sister.
Right.
And we're doing that stuff together.
Yep.
And what I think is cool is like, you're actually learning, then like your kids are actually seeing you run and manage stuff. So like what they're gaining secondhand on how to deal with people and how to deal with employees and how to build something and how to be a good teammate and all of those things that you get time together to do that other people wouldn't have. Like, you can't bring your kids to a lineman job,
right?
But you could bring them over here and show them how stuff works, or, hey, this is how you this is how you build knives. Like, this is how you grind handles. This is why it's important to do it.
I'm very open and talk to my kids about the challenges of what we're trying to do and the business and building, and actually even with the employees. I mean, very open with our employees of all this, because I want them to see and understand fully what the struggles are all the way along, so they can see how, if they want to start their own business someday, they actually maybe have a chance of succeeding at doing that. So how do you go from the SEALs to buying a ranch in Montana?
Yeah. So I got out in 2017. My business partner, Tim Sheehy, had started 2 businesses at the time. He was his Navy SEAL team guy as well. And he had an aerial wildfire fighting company as well as a military technologies company. Fortunately for me, like, they had an opportunity. I was moving out here. They were already set up. And so I started working for the military technologies company. And that was, again, just like straight startup style, like a bunch of people who really didn't know exactly what they were doing. It was a bunch of kids from MSU and a couple veterans. And somehow we turned that into an actual company that was providing solutions to the military. And Tim was able to basically build and grow and take that company and sell it in, I think, 2019. In the meantime of that, I'd been doing some cattle stuff on the side just because I liked doing it. And I had a good friend of mine that basically just invited me up to another friend's ranch. And it was kind of the first thing that really clicked for me after getting out. Like, I had a great job, great opportunity. It went super well. Nothing wrong with it by any means. It was definitely not the right fit. It was a lot of office time.
Right.
It just, I don't know. I just didn't have that, like, really, that it just didn't give me that, like, spark that every other job I'd ever had. And so, I had been there early, like one of the first, handful of people there. And then, I basically was like, I really enjoyed doing this cattle thing. And I'd worked at some ranches in the winter and stuff when we lived out here before, but nothing really to that scale. I grew up riding horses and stuff, and I always liked that stuff. I grew up helping friends, that had agriculture businesses in their family or whatever when I was a kid. And so when I started just helping people again, like, I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. And then kind of the deal was, it was like, they didn't pay me for any of it.
Right.
But it was like, I was gaining experience. They were answering all my questions, teaching me stuff. I had so many people that helped me out in that time. And I was just doing it as like a side thing that I really liked. And so I had like a GI Bill benefit I hadn't used. I'd already been to college. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to school and learn about something I want to learn about. So I did like an online program in beef cattle production and just kept learning about stuff and kept enjoying it. And so when Tim sold that company, he basically, we were chatting one day and he was like, well, what are you going to do now? Are you going to stay on with these guys? And I was like, no, I'm not working for like a big corporate.
Right.
I was already like kind of ready to do something different anyway. And I'd been doing this cattle thing like enough where I was really looking at, potentially trying to do something on my own or with some partners that I'd kind of like made along the way and friends and whatnot. And he said, well, man, that sounds like super interesting. We're really interested in investing back like into Montana. This is something we've always wanted to do and had interest in, but never really had the, capacity, both from the, like the capital capacity as well as the experience capacity. So basically him and his brother and I sat down and they were like, hey, this is something we're interested in doing. I probably had, through some of these different lease things I had done and different things that, had really made enough mistakes along the way to kind of go like, hey, I think I can put this thing together. And we started lining out kind of what that would look like. And Tim had been looking at some different places that he was interested in. And so we really got serious about looking at those. And so basically after he sold that, him and his brother were primary, shareholders in that business. So we came together and built this Little Belt Cattle Company concept. And ultimately, they came in and invested, in that project, and I came in to run it and get it off the ground. And I was probably at the point where like, and this is still probably yet to be fully determined, where, I had enough experience to get us going. I was either probably going to get us in like a lot of trouble really fast, or I was going to get it together and make it happen. And fortunately for me, like I said, I had some people, one of our business partners, Turk Stovall, who's like multi-generational rancher out of south of Billings, and just like world of knowledge in cattle and beef production and all these other things, was a mutual friend. Jim McCrae had introduced us, and I don't know if in the beginning Turk just kind of like got a kick out of like what we were trying to do. I don't know. I'd have to ask if like he took it even that seriously in the beginning,
right.
But now we're business partners on a feed yard. We run cattle together, and it's really gone from obviously still somebody that I rely on like heavily from a knowledge perspective at times, but it's really gone on somebody that like went from me kind of always like calling and like asking like for advice or help to like now us working together.
Right.
And it's been awesome. And so that is basically how we started out, and we took 3 properties that had been split up at some point in history and basically bought those 3, put them back together, and then have basically strategically grown that through leases, through other, deeded purchases. And our goal in the beginning, which we were super kind of naive in how we were going to get there, but our goal was always to do 100% Montana raised, start to finish, branded beef company, right? So we started out as a cow-calf operation. We didn't have any idea how long it was going to take to get there, what that was actually going to look like logistically, land management-wise. The land that we bought was in like various states of deferred maintenance, I guess is the best way to put it. But, building grazing plans that, that work to run that as one place versus 3 separate places.
Yep.
There's a ton of maintenance that had to happen right off the bat to even get that kind of, back into a more production ag ready place, right? That is just slowly and continues to happen now. But our goal from the very beginning, and we started this in 2019, around the time you guys did, right? And then COVID started right away. And that was really the first time that I think like as a country, we started to see these like cracks in the food system where, not so much here in Montana. And again, if you hunted or you knew local ranchers, like you had access to, pretty much the same thing you did before that. But friends of mine that lived in cities were like, man, it's crazy. We go to
empty shelves.
And for the first time, again, the complacency of Americans kind of was like, whoa, what do you mean?
Right.
We can't get access to food. What do you mean there's no steak on the shelf? Like, and we were at that time looking at, you see all these cattle in Montana and you wonder why like that was happening here too. And ultimately, like when you look at and you break down kind of the beef production and the food system as a whole, you realize that, different types of cattle fit into different buckets along that way.
Yeah.
And traditionally Montana's like very much like a cow calf producing state, but then those calves would generally get bought, and it's like a cattle performance state, right? We have excellent genetics up north here. The cattle that get produced here, people love them. in different places. But generally, those cattle would leave the state.
Right.
They'd get fed someplace else, processed someplace else, and then, kind of put out into national, basically beef systems. And there's nothing wrong with that system. But we started to kind of ask, like, well, how come that doesn't happen more here on kind of a sustainable, scalable level? And during that time and seeing those, like, if COVID hadn't happened, I wonder if we would have just kept down more the kind of the traditional path of just going like, hey, we'll be cow-calf producers with maybe some yearlings or something.
Right.
But that really started to highlight to us from a business that, putting high quality, nutrient dense protein in the form of beef back into our community and into our state was something that just like really resonated with us. Like, you know how it is as a hunter, or if small, or you're buying steers from, out of 4-H programs, there's a connection to where that food came from.
Right.
And there's a feeling of like community for the people who raise that. And I think we've lost that as a country. Like, most people had a tie to agriculture, or, as we get generations away from like your great grandfather and your grandfather and
the local butcher shop.
Yeah. And that knife being passed down to you, right. And seeing that and feeling that connection and knowing what it takes to put beef or any high quality food on a plate has been lost. And people now go to Walmart, they buy this steak, and there's no feeling there. There's no anything. So when you eat it or you throw it in the trash, it doesn't matter. Right. If you give somebody an elk tenderloin that you packed out for hours, or I give somebody, a box of beef that we produced and I know what went into it and who was there, and you hope that connection gets passed on, because it makes the value of that, of that experience deeper.
Yeah, we bought the neighbor's 4-H steer this year, and we just had my dad's 69th birthday party and a bunch of family over for that the other night. And we told everyone around the dinner table, like, it's literally the fence line right there. On the other side of the fence, that steer was raised right there. And there's also a couple people in this community eating the steers that my kids raised and the hog that my kids raised for 4-H this year in the community, eating theirs. And I guarantee you they're sitting around the table saying, hey, this is Macy's hog, or this is Sadie's steer. So it definitely adds a connection, and it makes it feel more special. And there's just a cool feeling knowing that, in a roundabout way, not really roundabout, in direct way, we're supporting the neighbor.
Yep. And knowing who and where your food comes from has definitely been lost. And that was really highlighted for us, when we started Little Bell Cattle Company, and Tim and I were sitting down and kind of going like, where are we going to go with this? And how are we going to build you don't see a lot of people building a startup ranch in 2020.
No, you kind of have to be born into, I mean, it's a bit unfortunate, but if I'm a knife maker and I raise a kid that just loves ranching, like, it's going to be really tough for that kid to ever own his own ranch.
Yeah, it is.
It's big money. Real estate in Montana is huge money.
Yep.
Most of that ground is bought up by rich people, maybe leased back to somebody that wants to run a ranch. Yep. But like, if you're not born into it, there is absolutely a feeling like if you're not born into it, it's not for you, which personally, like, I wasn't born into it, so I don't feel that way. And I there's a couple points there. The barrier of entries to get into ranching are huge, right? Mm-hmm. Number one, the capital intensity that it takes to get started is enormous. Most people don't have the capacity in themselves. I didn't, and have to go outside, and find, partners and or investors or whatever to get that going. Number two, there's a huge experience barrier of entry. Sure.
Very much like lineman work or military, that, there is
you're part veterinarian, you're part biologist with the land, with the grazing. There's so much business behind it of planning your finances and being able to take the money that you've got, work through the rest of the year, and you're very likely going to have to borrow some money. So, but, there's just so much that
there's so much to it. And again, like, looking at that list as a whole, it could be like extremely overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, probably for us, like, not knowing some of those things going in, that you learn along the way. Mm-hmm. But very much like lineman work or military, like I don't love when people are like, oh, it's just a lifestyle, because it's not. And when you look at the people who've done it for a long time, these are professionals. These are their career. This is their business. the skill sets that they've obtained over a long period of time where they make it look easy are extremely challenging.
Yeah.
And I actually hate when people go like, oh, it's just a lifestyle, because it's not. It's a business, and it's a critical business, in my opinion. Like I say all the time, like food security is national security. The same way that like 1% of the population provides the defense of this country, 1% of the population provides the food for this country.
Yep.
The same way that of that 1%, it's like a very small percentage of people that provide direct combat action to defend this country. It's like less than 1% are direct food producers for this country, right? So it's this small group of people that's providing this huge service, and there's lifestyle components to that career path, but it is not a lifestyle. Right. There is lifestyle things that you have to be willing to sacrifice.
Right.
But like, same way, like if you're just doing it to tell people that, you know, you're a special operations person or you're a lineman, if you don't love doing that job,
right,
or you're not going to make it through the challenging times. If the only reason you want to be a SEAL is to tell girls at the bar you're a SEAL, you're not going to make it through Hell Week.
Right.
If you truly want to do that job, you'll do what it takes to get there.
Right.
And that's been my attitude. Like I really wanted to be in production agriculture and beef cattle production specifically. Like that was my goal. And whatever it took for me to get there. And again, back to that like new guy attitude, I still like, I will ride up to somebody and be like, man, you are really good at this and I suck. What am I doing wrong?
Right.
Now, if I pretended I knew everything, like they're probably not going to give me the advice, but you're right. You have the skill sets that you have to, it's a tough business.
There's so much strategy involved in it. And there's so many contingencies you have to think about, whether it's animals getting sick, whether it's not getting enough rain, not having enough grass to grow. So then you have to buy hay, but then what's the hay prices this year versus like we have tons of grass. How much hay can we sell that we produce? Like, and it goes on and on and on. And then there's so much maintenance that's, whether it's fences, equipment.
It never ends.
Nonstop, right?
And there's so much out of your control, right? So like you're dealing with a business that's tied directly to Mother Nature. And
also there's no actual set, like when you're in the military, you're a lineman, you know exactly what you're getting paid. There's actually no set price.
No.
You actually don't know what the cattle prices are going to be next fall. So a lot of the assumptions that you build your business off of, and that's what people don't understand, is that you could have, like cattle prices right now are pretty good, right?
They're great. Yep.
So you could base all of your decisions off of these prices today for next year, and you could win big time, or you could literally lose your ranch.
And like we were talking about when, as you do these projections, right? And you go like, hey, in X amount of time, like where are we going to be and how are we going to base that off of sales and the growth? And you could do that. But like for us, it's such a fluctuating market that even if you look at it from the short time that we've been doing it, the ups and downs and what drives those and why makes it very hard to predict what the future is going to look like. And that's something that, like, I look at these guys who've been doing this for 5-6 generations, and, you want to talk about sustainability. Like if they weren't sustainable, they wouldn't be in business. Right. And they've gotten to see kind of what those, everybody remembers the tough times, and it reminds you during the good times to plan wisely.
Save for a rainy day.
Yeah. And, it's such an interesting thing when you look at it. Like for us, we are literally like taking calves from like hitting the ground all the way through putting them on people's plates.
So you said you own a feedlot now?
We do. Yep.
Okay. So you guys are now not just shipping the cows or the steers away to get fed out, but you guys are actually taking and feeding them out? Correct.
Yep. So we partnered on a feed yard that had been in business for, a long time just east of Billings. And it's a commercial finishing yard basically, as well as, a more traditional grow yard like you see here in Montana. But yeah, we are finishing our cattle there. So like literally everything is happening 100% here in Montana. We're trying to source, as much feed as we can for the feed yard locally.
What about getting the butchering process?
Butchering's happening in Montana as well, which was one of the biggest bottlenecks that we faced in the very beginning, where you think you can just go like, oh yeah, we want to process cattle here. Well, when processors are 2 years out or not taking any new customers.
Yeah, we're seeing that here.
Yeah. So what do you do? If you're a new business.
Right. And there's actually laws against you processing your own and selling it. There's FDA laws.
Correct. So there's and there's USDA approved plants that allow you to do certain things, from shipping beef over state lines to where you can sell and how you can sell. And, for us, we kind of started out, our goal has always been putting the highest quality beef back into the state and into our local communities. Right. And through doing that, we also were like looking at it as a business, like, man, it'd be great to also do like a direct to consumer. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of, as we actually over a couple of years, were able to get to the point where we were processing cattle at a volume and scale that kind of allowed us to really go down those roads, which took a long time, because a lot of people don't understand that, it can be 24 months.
Right.
Before if you take them through that whole process.
Yeah. Calf, like with our kids as 4-H steers, calf's born in February or March, April, whenever people do their calving. And then my kids are buying their project we're going this coming weekend to go buy a steer. So October. And then they have to feed that steer out all the way until next August.
Yep.
So it's an 18-month process.
Yep.
And that doesn't include, like, my boy, he bred his own cow. So that process actually started 9-10 months
Correct.
Before that. So now he's AIing his cow. Then he's putting her on a cleanup bull.
I love it.
All the way through. Then that calf is being born, February, March, whatever. So to your point, it goes from an 18-month process if you're just buying a calf to a 24-month process.
It's 24 months basically to where you put $1 in the investment pool to where you get anything out. That's a long time.
With no idea what the price will be at the end of it.
Yeah. And so all you can do is like the best job you can.
Which in the last 24 months, everybody can be like, oh, cattle prices are great right now. Ranchers are doing really well. Well, we've never seen higher hay prices than last year. So in the last 24 months, the hay prices were, it's $300 a ton.
Our input costs went up basically from in 2021, 40%.
Yeah.
Input cost to feed and maintain cattle. So you saw a lot of places, not make it through. Yeah. How do you, the cost of the end result product didn't go up 40%, but the input cost to keep going with no idea of where those markets were going. And in that is actually a big reason why you're seeing now the prices that they are, just because it's, basically supply and demand of what's in the system to what is the demand. And so you're seeing these high prices because the supply numbers are lowered, right? But that is all driven from, drought / extremely high input cost. Mm-hmm. And, again, a lot of that stuff is out of your control, and you could sit there all day and complain about it, but it doesn't change the fact of how you basically are going to like run your operation. And you guys see it, like, is your son doing like Angus? What's he doing for, Black Angus?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. And it's interesting because, my kids have actually seen 4-H has been so good for them because they've actually seen now that the policies in our government and a lot of the decisions that are made directly reflect and affect the end product of the steak, the package of steaks laying on the shelf. And for example, when my oldest daughter, who's 19, started 4-H when she was 9 or 10, she was buying bags of feed back then for when it was on sale, it was around $8.99 a bag. I want to say this year we were paying somewhere around $19.99 a bag, $20 a bag for feed. And that wasn't the high-end feed. There's feed out there that's $30, $32 a bag. And my kids this last year, because we buy it a ton at a time, we'll buy a pallet of feed, 40 bags. They were buying their feed and they're like, Dad, this is insane. Last year they were paying, $13-14, then it's 18-19 this year. Like just in a couple years, it's gone up so much. Mm-hmm. And these are 12, 15, 16-year-old kids that are commenting to me like, holy shit, Dad. And I was like, yeah. And this is an example, kids, of like when certain things happen and certain situations happen with our government, certain rules, regulations, whatever these circumstances are that drive up the prices, now you need more money for your steer to make money.
Yep.
Well, what that's going to mean is the person that buys it is going to have to pay more, which is going to mean those steaks at the end of the day, that food on their plate is going to cost those people more money. Like that all trickles downstream.
100%.
And, and it's so good for kids to see, but so many people leave their day job and they stop at the store on the way home and they buy a little thing of groceries and they just don't think about everything that happened in the last 2.5 to 3 years that drove that particular meal that they just bought up in price.
Yeah. And if you, 100%. And so like they're seeing that happen on a smaller scale. Imagine you're feeding thousands of cattle at a time, mm-hmm. right? And you look at those input costs incrementally, like where that puts you in just.
Yeah. How many tons of hay do you feed a day in December?
It just depends on like the age class. So we'd be like, you're somewhere around 30 pounds per head per day.
Right.
Something like that, depending on the weather. That's pretty average, I'd say.
Times a couple thousand head. If I know a guy in eastern Montana that has 10,000 mother cows.
Yeah, so you figure right there. You take 30 pounds times 10,000. That's what you're feeding a day.
Yep.
And then you take that at where you go from 1 year it's $90 a ton to $300 a ton.
Right.
But the cost of steak, and it would get to the point where it would be unaffordable, unattainable.
Well, and what a lot of people also don't understand is there's this middleman process between the actual rancher and the sale and the actual steak in the store.
Correct.
The packing houses and a bunch of the bullshit that happens where it's not, when you start figuring out and you're doing the math in your head in the store per pound of meat and you start thinking about how many pounds a steer weighs on the hook, that doesn't actually equate because there's a middleman in there sucking up a ton of the profits.
You're absolutely right. So what happens, for folks that aren't super familiar with the just beef production is you've got cow-calf operations that produce calves. Those calves get bought by somebody else and go into like what we would call a yearling or feeder program. Those go then to a feed yard to be finished. Those then get sold to, a large packing plant that processes them, and then they go into these different programs out of there. So there's phase lines, along the way that everybody's making, their incremental margin on, which is not that big of a margin, right. But it's a very incremental. Each phase line has a different, point of sale, and at that point of sale, whoever's managing that particular age class is making, their margin ultimately. So what we did and what our goal was to build a sustainable local supply chain of start to finish Montana beef. So, we looked at that whole process across the board, and we basically own the process all the way through up until the processor. We work with a processor that we don't have any involvement as far as like business wise in, other than we're a customer of theirs and they slaughter and process those cattle for us. It's full 100% USDA approved plant. So we basically can sell commercially, really to wherever we want. And so as we really like looked at it from our business perspective is we kind of had this like direct to consumer model, which involved local people being able to order and pick up. We started to look at this direct to consumer e-commerce model, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we had this kind of hybrid, which I call like direct to wholesale. And that is selling beef directly to local restaurants and working with those chefs and work with these restaurants to provide them what we think is probably the highest quality, beef that they're going to be able to get versus buying from these large national programs. And there's been a huge amount of support from a number of those places to buying local. And there's a number of benefits, but they also have to be committed to like, we can't do it as cheap as these super big guys can. And it's been awesome though to work with the partners we have that have supported us and supported buying local. And it's really cool because they take the products we produce and they then put their expertise on it. So you go to some of these restaurants and they're making us look good.
Yeah.
You know, we're giving them the best beef and they're cooking it to the best. Cause I can make you the best beef in the world. And if you promptly go home and burn it, you can be like, man, that wasn't that good. Right. Like I can control it up to a certain point, where working with these restaurants and these chefs has actually like added another layer of control for us, because we're very selective about who we work with. And we know that those people are representing us and those cattle and our product well.
As a consumer too, you can put pressure on your local restaurants to actually try to use local beef.
Correct.
We had a burger literally last night coming home from Big Fork from my, 2 nights ago from Big Fork from my boys' football game. We had a burger at the Raven restaurant up on Flathead Lake, and it says right in there it's Mannix beef.
Yep.
Mannix is out
Yeah,
of
I know
Elmville,
that. Yep.
Ovando, where I
Yep.
grew up. You know, Mannix beef is, pretty popular around Western Montana because they're a ranch that's within an hour of here.
And I know Cole, and like what he's doing is awesome.
Yep.
And him and I talk a lot about, there's a lot of people out there doing it. So there is a lot of capacity for people, but you have to have that support, and they have to understand that local places doing it start to finish, aren't going to be able necessarily to compete. It'd be like if somebody said to you, hey, how come your prices aren't the same as the pocket knife I get at Walmart?
Right.
And you go, well, the process that it takes for us to do this,
right.
It's number one, superior product. Number two, the process that we can't compete with products coming out of China.
Right.
Right.
But by buying our stuff, we're also supporting the local softball team, and we're sponsoring this local program and that one. We just got a letter this morning thanking us for a knife that we donated for a sheriff in Kalispell that had gotten shot in the line of duty, and they auctioned it off, and it brought a bunch of money. And that isn't going to happen from big national companies.
No.
So it's those small ranches. It's the Mannixes around the Ovando. It's the you guys over around 2 Dot where you're donating, you're going to local benefits and supporting your community, and you're hiring people.
And that's that touch point, right? It's making the connection back again to like who and where your food comes from, knowing the people, knowing where the ranch is, right? There's something cool about that you don't get without that. And something we've tried to do is like build that touch point, as much as we can, so that people have a better understanding of what it takes to do what we're doing. And, working with these different restaurants and stuff, and a lot of people get it, right? And they will support it, and they've been awesome about it. But you have to find the right partners in that.
And needing to find the meat cutting facilities. I mean, around here, we have to literally schedule a steer to be killed 6 months in advance.
Yeah, so imagine you're trying
insane.
to do that on, 250 steers a year or more.
I think that's why some of these butcher shops around here have gotten so far backed up, is some of what you're talking about and what you're doing, more and more people are trying to do, and they're sending more stuff locally.
Yep.
But it's overwhelmed
these
3
small
or 4
plants,
butcher shops. They don't have the capacity.
And then you look at it from like a larger, kind of scalability perspective, right? Like you could probably do it cheaper someplace else, larger, out of state.
Right.
But then if you're not supporting those, there's a local supply chain that everybody kind of has to help, support each other through, because if we don't process beef at local processors here in Montana and we go out of state with those, then there's a possibility that those guys go out of business. And then there's,
right.
We actually, the feed yard that we're partnered on is that you see all these processing plants opening up on a medium to smaller scale. And so nobody had really looked at where are the cattle going to come from? We do a grass-fed grain finish, but if you're looking for fat cattle coming out of feed yards to then go into those processing plants to be killed to go into, beef programs, where are those cattle going to come out of? So we looked at the potential of maybe partnering on a processing plant, but that was not what we wanted to do. We wanted to be excellent at the livestock side of things and let somebody else that is really great on the processing side do that. But anyway, our model on the feed yard was actually providing a regional commercial finishing yard that people could finish cattle in regionally to then supply into regional processing plants.
Right.
If you miss any link in the chain along the way, it breaks the chain.
Right.
And so there's a little bit of like helping, you're helping each other in the, and even people that you potentially see as like a competitor, where I'm under the, I think from like a local food production standpoint that like the rising tide raises all boats. There's enough opportunity for everybody, and everybody's product is a little different, right? Everybody's story is a little bit different. And there's something that like I might do that resonates with somebody, and there's something that somebody else might do that resonates with somebody else, which is awesome. As long as they're buying local, like, product.
And that's where it really truly actually starts with the consumer. If you can go shop at a local butcher shop and buy meat from them, that begins that process, right?
Yep.
If the busier, the more meat that they sell, the more they're going to justify being able to hire more people to butcher more animals to potentially add on to their building or buy a bigger building, which is then going to in turn force them to need to buy more cattle from the feed yard.
The capacity goes up.
Yeah, but it starts all with the demand from the consumer.
100%. And sometimes I think the consumer thinks, like, if you, again, totally my opinion, and just take it for that. But if you walk down Bozeman Main Street, right, and you look at all these nice fancy restaurants and things, I think most of the tourists and most of the people eating there think that they're eating some sort of local product, right? Montana's known for cattle, cowboys, etc. We got to be eating Montana beef. Well, in actuality, for a lot of those places, the Cisco truck just makes it stop along the way, and like you're getting the same. And I think that there's a competitive advantage, and the people we work with believe that as well. There's a competitive advantage to having local, high quality product. But it's hard from, all those guys have pretty much been burned by like other local guys that are trying to do that, because to keep a consistent product over 12 months, it's just hard to do. And to keep consistency in your quality and your like ability to deliver at a restaurant, you can't miss a delivery and go, hey, sorry, we don't have any steaks tonight. Right. My guy didn't bring them.
Right.
And so,
and there's these off times of years where it's not normally the time for butchering cattle or raising, there has to be a place where this meat's stored, where it's frozen. And that's the other challenge too for you guys, is like the direct to consumer thing. It's frustrating because like we would love to be able to buy. I mean, we're actually looking for a program that we have here at MKC to reward our best customers.
Yep.
We have one of our stages in our program that we're going to roll out next month. We're going to be sending beef out to some of our top customers.
Yep.
But it's actually harder than you would think. We wanted to ship Montana raised beef, but I want to just be able to call somebody up and say, hey, I got 10 customers. I want to send them, T-bones and whatever, some sirloins, whatever. I want to send them 40 pounds each of meat, some steaks, whatever, and I want you guys to cut up and ship it out.
Yep.
And it's actually harder to find those people than you would think, because there are regulations involved, and to be able to keep a supply of beef year-round frozen, like that's a whole nother level of commitment.
And if you think about it, like, again, like in Montana, right, there's a set calving window that most people fall into, and it's not that big. It's like January on the early end, let's
March,
just call
April,
it, let's call it like mid-June-ish on the latest.
Yeah.
So in that period, all those calves hit the ground, right? And then that's a certain number to span those out. So that means they're all going to be ready, from your start date to that end date. They will all be, at 24 months within that same block of time, 24 months later, right? So how do you stretch that out? And there's ways to do it. And again, we could talk about beef cattle production for a whole nother, hours. I won't get all the way into it, but there's a way to do that. But, then it becomes like, do you process all those at once and put them in a freezer and then work through that? Do you do a certain number a week? Back to the processors. If they're not processing every week, how do they keep a staff? Right. And again, like we actually try with our processor to give them like weekly business, which adds logistical problems for me and may not be the best business decision. But if they're out of business, it's
definitely not efficient for you to haul cows down every week.
I could do it like once a month, but then what if they can't keep employees and then then they close down and then we don't have access to them anymore, right? So back to kind of like having to like work together, which I think is cool. It's like American companies like building and growing, like, again, this supply chain together, and everybody's responsible for their piece. But again, if that link goes away, it goes upstream and downstream. And so like for what you guys want to do, like that's actually something we could probably do for you. But so we actually started going down this direct to consumer e-commerce. That was our like main thing. We were like, hey, we're going to get our marketing out there. We're going to have a customer base. And we did that. And then we started opening that up, and we could not keep up logistically we had the product, the shipping perishables, just the logistics of what it takes. You guys know fulfillment, how challenging that is. And for us, like we have a super small team. We've got, space that we store stuff, but we don't have like, it's not like we have this big supply chain line. And we really, to say like, oh yeah, we'll just hire all these people and we'll do this and this. We didn't feel like we had, had been there long enough to like make sure that was the right way to go. Mm-hmm. So it really came down to me to make this like decision. I felt like we could do one or the other. So it was like, do we go straight direct to e-commerce and we focus on doing that and we go, we ship everything out, or do we focus on our state and on our community? Right. And again, coming back to like our goals and our mission and vision of this company was to put high quality nutrient dense beef back into our communities and on our friends and family and neighbors and visitors. And that's ultimately the direction that we went. So we're not going to do that, but we basically, I was like, we have to be really good at doing that locally first. And then we'll branch out and we'll probably, honestly, like, I think it's interesting what you guys have done. I'd be curious where you like came with the idea, but where you go, we've got this many knives ready to go. Right. And they're coming out this day. And that's how many we got. Right. And I think from what it looks like from the outside, like that's worked really well for you guys. And I actually thought about that from like our perspective, where you go like, maybe you build these boxes and then you go like, hey, we've only got so many of them. And it's something manageable that you can do with the team that you have. And then you incrementally build on that. Exactly. Right. But our biggest thing was like, as a business, we made a concerted effort and a choice to, not only are we like born, bred, fed 100% of Montana, you also have to consume in Montana right now. Right. And I actually think that's kind of cool. I know it's not the greatest for like probably the number of customers that we'd like to be serving right now. And we're going to get there, but we got to do this first. And again, I think like you have to be very, just mindful about like the bites you take and when you take them. Right. And we've done that, and we've gotten really great feedback on our quality. We've gotten really great feedback on our consistency. I'm excited for you guys to try them, and see what you think. But I actually think it's cool. We have customers that come to Montana and they go, hey, I'm driving from, Big Fork down to Yellowstone, and we're going to come in to a restaurant or a market that serves your guys' stuff, and we're getting a little belt steak.
Do you guys have a list of restaurants on your website that you guys serve?
Yeah, we do now. Okay. Yep. There's a list of them, and primarily like Bozeman, Big Sky again. And that also comes out to like being able to distribute. We want to build and grow, but we're also, again, like I like having that touch point with our customers where we're doing our own distribution. Cause again, that's another like step in the game where somebody else is saying like, hey, we, ultimately can pay you less. And then they go to your customer and say, you've got to pay more. Right. And nothing wrong with it, but
no, this is a model that needs to be emulated and copied all across the country. Cause like you guys can only get so big and only serve so much. And like, there's obviously going to be plenty of room for you guys to grow, but like Mannixes have been trying it and been doing it. And there's other places I know that have been trying it and doing it in Wyoming and different Colorado and different places. And if everybody would do this, community sustainable, program across the country, it would help everyone.
100%. And there's a reason that there's the consolidation within the industry that there is. And again, it would be way too long to get into all of that, but being able to kind of break that down to more, and again, I think you get higher quality like product. There's a touch point of who and where it comes from. Mm-hmm. Everybody does something like a little bit different. And one of the things that we've worked on doing that we kind of have set up now from just like a business scalability perspective is that, let's say I can only produce X amount of calves a year based on the number of mother cows that we have. We've kind of built out this like program to where we could buy and source verify calves from other really good producers from them at a premium. So if you sell your calves in the fall, and I know you're a great producer and you produce great calves, I could come in the fall and buy those from you at a premium higher than you would get on like a large scale market. And we could put those into our program and, take them through whether they're grass steers going into the feed yard or
Right.
whatever size they're at, and come back to you. And that's a way for us then to actually help other local Montana ranchers.
Your neighbors.
Correct. Get a better, because you watch how hard these folks work. You watch what goes into it, and you watch they're tied to whatever that commodity market is. And we've got beef programs because we sell a lot of livestock still as well. The branded beef company is one enterprise of the company, but we sell a lot of we still sell calves, we sell bred cattle, we sell, the livestock component of our business is still the main part of our business. I mean, we are 100% a working ranch, and we're building out this branded beef line as one of our enterprises. And I think today with any startup, you have to have like multiple enterprises that collectively,
right.
And for us as like we've had to do some things that are probably different than some places that are like, well, why would you do that? And you're like, well, we need to have some sort of like steady revenue. So when people buy hats and sweatshirts and t-shirts, and that helps us big time. And that is supporting us getting closer to our goal to be able to providing them, if they don't live in Montana, beef at some point.
Right.
And when you look at all of those like different components that go into it, producers should be paid for that. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. We're hopeful in that if we could build a good enough, brand in business that creates the demand, that it actually like kind of outdoes the supply that we personally have in our own system,
right,
to where we could start buying. And we've actually, we did that a little bit this year with Montana Stock Growers has it's a cattle drive program that raises money for Montana Stock Growers, where local ranches donate a steer. We actually finished those steers at our feed yard. And then Little Belt Cattle Company bought a handful of those steers from ranches that we knew produce cattle in a way that we think is the in line with our vision. And we bought those steers and put those into our system. And it was like super rewarding. And back to like what you guys do community wise. I mean, we just did the Hiddlebin Scholarship at MSU is a scholarship for rural Native American and basically I disadvantaged people within the state of Montana. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing program. And so we donated some stuff into that program, which I had no idea how well it was going to do. It's a testament, though, to what people think of, I guess, us and our business. We raised $63,000 for that program. That's 15 kids, they told us, that could go to college on a scholarship from our local community, basically with selling beef and basically supplying beef as part of basically a package, right?
Yeah.
We support Montana Stock Growers. We support, buying, steers from 4-H.
Right.
We support, local schools. We support putting in, one of the things that we did is we basically have built like a premium, kind of product, right, in our higher end cuts.
Right.
We started this food truck to be able to take grind, more of like a middle market meat, and provide that at a price point that we think is like super reasonable. And we've run that food truck all summer. One, it's a great way for us to get through some grind that you end up with a lot of. But number two, it's like a family like mine can go there, a family like yours can go there. It is the exact same beef that's coming off of our,
right, just not the premium cuts.
Prime ribeyes.
Yeah.
It's trimmed from all of those.
Right.
Going into this burger program that isn't a specific grind program. So you are getting the same high quality, nutrient dense protein.
Right.
If you eat one of our ribeyes or you get one of our packs of grind.
Yeah.
And again, I'm super proud to put that like in front of my kids. I'm super proud to put that in front of my neighbors. I love it when people give us feedback like, man, the dining experience that I had eating one of your guys' steaks here was awesome. And following along like what you guys have done from the beginning. And again, developing that touch point, sitting here talking about it and kind of educating customers on like what it takes to get from point A to point B.
Right.
I mean, do you guys feel like in your business, because I feel like your guys' marketing is really good, developing like people know the care in what it takes for you guys in just your story. So when they buy one of your knives, it's more special than just going down and grabbing something.
Yeah, no, we absolutely hope that it means more and that they actually buy it with the intention of passing it down and that it has more meaning. And the fact that it's why we highlight our employees on our our weekly vlogs that Henry shoots here. It's why we actually try and put our employees on camera and put them out there, because we actually want our customers to know who's working on their knives and see that it's not just, it's not just me anymore. It's all these other people, but it's not just faceless people.
Yep.
That they're helping, Melissa and Travis and Tristan and, all these guys, Dylan, right? It goes all the way through, that there's all these families that are being helped now by the support that people are, showing when they buy our knives.
Yep.
So yeah, no, it means a ton. And I think there's been obviously a huge, surge in people that actually care. I mean, it's kind of the buzzword these days of, buying local, farmers markets and, community gardens. And, I've always thought, and I've always wondered why ranchers can't get all together and build like a co-op where, they build their own damn packing house, and ranches are potentially a member of something where they all help fund and collectively own their own freaking packing house. And, where that meat can actually get processed right here in our own state. And if every state had co-ops of packing houses, you guys could grow an amazing, huge company and never ship beef out of the state. It could just, why can't our Montana ranchers feed our Montana families?
And I think
why can't Wyoming's feed theirs?
Yep.
And I think it's definitely improving. I mean,
it is. And there's people
improving.
doing that, right? Like you mentioned, Mannix is what they're doing with like the old salt model. I think is fantastic. And it's happening, but just what it takes to do that. And like, again, back to just the capital, and then it's a different skill set. But it is, and I'm with you. Like if you had that happening, then you would see alternatives to, the consolidation of kind of the big four that everybody hears about. But
the only way it's going to happen is for consumers to demand it. And when I say demand it means to start buying that way.
Start buying that way, asking for it. But again, I think people care about the quality that they're getting, whether it's in, our beef or your knives. And like one thing we do, I think is cool. I don't know what you'll think. You can tell me. So like totally just stealing from like kind of the SEAL team, I guess, like prize model or whatever, in the military, they give you these different things. They're not really worth, anything from the military perspective, other than it's a status symbol of where you're kind of at, right? You get a brown t-shirt after Hell Week. You get a Trident pin after you've completed SQT. You get these different things. And all it basically says is that like, you've gotten to this level. And I think about like, how do you encourage people to be like, kind of the ultimate team players and different things. And so something that we started doing and we still do is we give your knives to people at our company who have gone like above and beyond what their kind of role or job is. And usually it's something that has like positive impact on people, outside of themselves.
Sure.
And I don't give them to everybody. And what I do is I give them to people basically with a note saying kind of why they got it. And it's been cool because you can see the people that have them and the people that don't. And some people never get them.
Wow.
And it's kind of a cool thing because the people that have them,
that's really cool.
They, everybody, they don't know maybe exactly what they did to get it, but they saw that person has stepped up at some point. And it's been really cool. And it's something that's super special that has like huge value, but also has like kind of significance. Cause I mean, just cause you work for us and I don't care what your job is or what level you're at. Like if you don't actually earn it, you're not getting one. Back to what we talked about.
It's a meritocracy.
It's a meritocracy. And it's a earned thing coming from that you could go out and buy one. And like we had a guy like kind of build these cowboy sheaths. So you can go out and buy one and you can wear it, but like people would know that's not the one that was given. And it's been really fun because I think the people who've got them, there's like a big sense of pride. That's just like cool. You get a brown t-shirt and you go like, it's just a t-shirt, but it means more. And I hope it means more to our guys. But like, that's something where again, like they know that what they're getting is something that's like special and can be passed down. And that comes from what you guys have done. And again, like I love this, like watching Montana companies do amazing things here in the state and what you're seeing from just like the hardworking people that are here and the companies that are being built here now. It's just something I'm like super proud to be part of that community of just, you know, Montana based businesses.
No, it's really cool. And I appreciate that story. That's really cool. And I have a ton of pride in what we're doing here. And we're, you know, I was actually telling a friend of mine yesterday, he's like, well, geez, how big do you want to get? I'm like, well, it's not a dollar amount. To me, it's how much of the process have we brought in-house and how much are we still not quite doing in-house? And we're doing it potentially in another state. And to me, it's about the growth through the job creation. And I want to do every single process all the way through the whole entire thing here, which is going to mean several hundred jobs.
Yep.
You know, but we have to be incremental. It's no different than what you're doing right now. Like, yeah, I'm sure you'd love to ship beef all over the country. But it's an incremental build. You have to choose your battles. You know, I kind of equate it to like, I've said the last few years, it felt like we're kind of running from a forest fire and we just are spraying water on what's burning us the hottest.
Yeah.
And you can't put the whole forest fire out. But you just got to keep it off of you and not let it consume.
And you got to like prioritize, like, what can we do
right,
the best that we can do right now? Yep. And because again, we could try to do all these different things, but then, you know, similar to like, you know, again, back to military stuff, is there is that point of your quality can potentially get diminished by your quantity.
Right.
And I don't want to be shipping so many boxes to where our quality starts to slip just to fill orders. I'd rather fill a small number of orders on a weekly basis and do that really well and then add the next layer.
And
then,
learn how to scale it.
Correct. And then when you go, hey, we're there, you know, and you and I, you know this, and we talked about it a little bit before, like there's that kind of imaginary like teeter-totter where there's either like too much work and not enough people, or you bring out all these people and then you don't have enough work.
Right. It's kind of the chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, gosh, you don't know what, you know, do you build it first, you know, do you run yourself basically completely out of capacity and then build it? And it's a challenge, but that's the exciting part of it. It's what drives us to keep doing this stuff. And it also shows other people it's possible in their areas, or, you know, might be a rancher in Wyoming that sees what you're doing and starts emulating it, or it could be another knife company, or it could be somebody with a passion in whatever it is that they're doing. That's like, God dang, this guy freaking quit the Navy SEALs and went and, you know, did this. Like, I can do that.
And it shows like what I think what both of us are doing is that you have like something you want to do. It's like, you'd be better off to go do it, go try it.
Right.
And you'd be better off for it not working out than not.
Well, I always knew I would regret if I look back, because I talked about this for years, but if I look back when I was 60 and decided it was too late, I knew I'd always regret not giving it a shot.
Yeah.
You know, so
there's nothing worse than not giving it the shot and not knowing. I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. Right. And I think there's so many people now that just go like, oh, when I get this, I'll do it. When I have this much money in the bank account, I'll do it. And then all of a sudden it gets to the point where like, it just never happens. Right. And, you know, I don't personally live that way. I think one of the things somebody was asking me the other day, like what, you know, just kind of like whatever, like rewarding or kind of impact. And I think there's two things. Like, number one, anybody that's like interested in potentially like getting into agriculture production, agriculture ranching, it is a doable thing. You've got to be committed to like what that's going to look like and what it's going to take and what the reality of that may look like. But we've got a bunch of guys, like we started doing this thing, trying to help more veterans get introduced to it. And, you know, we've got some good success stories and we've got some like complete failures. Right. And there is a path forward there though, right? Like there's a path to kind of where whatever the thing is that you want to do. And I think like being able to kind of chart that out. But the biggest thing about it is you got to start, and you got to start somewhere, and you're never going to get anywhere if you don't like start at it, you know? And
yeah. And people need to also understand that it's a multi-year building process. Like none of this stuff's just, you're not going to win the lottery, and it's not going to strike overnight.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think people could look at, you know, any business and I think people sometimes look and go like, man, look where these guys are at like right now. But they didn't see when I was doing it for free, they didn't see the learning process that it took. They didn't see, you know, and sometimes it's easy to see somebody, you know, kind of making their way up the mountain and forget where they parked and the hike in. You know what I mean? And it's just,
and they don't see the amount of challenges that are in front of you that you see that they don't necessarily see, you know, that they think you've made it. But, you know, we feel like a lot of people think we've made it. And I was just telling the team this morning, I feel like we just now are beginning.
That's exactly
so
how
now we actually have a little, I drew up this big thing on the board this morning about, I feel like, you know, I drew up a big blob, and I said, this is like a country we're trying to invade. And in the beginning, we sent in some spies, and we sent in a couple little people, and then we built a militia. And then now I feel like we've actually built like a big base.
Yep.
And now we're starting to expand our base, and we're running these missions, and we're expanding our base of operation. And we've got little places in different parts of this country, but we definitely are not in control of it yet.
Yeah, like you've got that foothold.
We've got a great foothold, and we've got a place to work from now, which means, you know, some savings in the bank and good position with some equipment and some people and some manpower. Like now, you know, I told all those guys downstairs this morning, now I feel like I have an army.
Yep.
Right. You know, we have our people, we have some funding, and now we can start to go forward.
Yep.
So for all the success that it appears that we've had, I just feel like now we're just getting started.
Yep. Because you have that foothold, right? You have that base, but that doesn't mean that base can't be overran
100%.
at any moment.
You make a couple mistakes, you leave the back door open, and
you don't have and I feel the same way. It's like you're starting to get a foothold, but that doesn't mean that like the diligence that got you the foothold can
you can't let up
diminish at all. And, you know, I mean, I see like a lot of similarities where you got to start with like this quality product, right? You got to people have to buy into the story of what you know, who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. And then you start making those little incremental, like sand in the bucket, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now you're like, oh, we got some sand in there. I really don't want my bucket to get kicked over and have to restart.
100%.
And I think that only comes from, you know, taking the foundation, the strong foundation, then and building more on top of it.
So how do people find you or support you?
Yeah. So we're on, you can find us online, www.littlebeltcattleco.com. Find us on Instagram at Little Belt Cattle Co. If you want to kind of see what we're doing, we try to put stuff up of just operationally kind of where we're at. There's a number of restaurants that are listed on our website. We're working towards being able to get out, you know, outside Montana. We appreciate everybody's patience. We will get there. And the funny thing is the volume that we're doing for like what we're at right now, we're able to maintain here locally. And we will absolutely like work to increase that. But yeah, people can go to those places, and
and if people can, you know, people can support you guys, even if they can't buy your beef in, you know, Florida or whatever. They can buy a hat, they can buy a shirt, and then they can also just go buy beef locally at their place and support the guy, the local Florida guy or Texas or Nebraska guy that's doing what you're doing, because there are people around the country trying to do the same
absolutely
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the more support people have, and I think people don't realize just how, you know, again, like small incremental support, how far that actually goes.
Yeah.
And I would rather see somebody go in, like you said, to a local butcher shop and buy local beef from somebody else than, you know, and get to know those folks and like get to know your local. And that's how it used to be and I think there's something really cool about that. You know, and again, that's one reason, like probably like you, like I'll do every step of that process from, you know, cabin stuff to, you know, whatever, shipping yearlings to going to the processor, going to the feed yard. Like I'm all over the place on every one of those steps to include delivering beef. And I like dropping off box of our product, chatting with the people that are, cooking it, eating it, whatever. And, I think that level of like involvement isn't just us. There's other people out there doing that, and supporting those folks as well supports local buying and local production. And that is ultimately how, again, back to like the food security is national security. That's how we secure our food system in America, which go travel around the world and find me, the systems that we have here, like even when things don't look, like, maybe as best as they are, as good as they had, we still have it better than everywhere else, basically. And, supporting local producers, buying locally, doing all those things, buying America, pay the little bit extra for the higher quality that keeps, that's important. All of that plays into the overall. And I think we have to get back to that as a country. And, I know from, for us from beef cattle production and just beef production in general, the more that happens across the board, the better it is for everybody.
Yeah. And business is also, I'll shine a little light on us for a second. Like you can go buy a chest freezer for $600-700, whatever, and put it in your local business. We bought a 4-H beef, but it could be a beef from your local rancher or whatever. But we bought a whole beef this year at the 4-H, and we threw it all in the freezer downstairs for the employees to take home at night. So I've told them, be respectful to each other. Don't take tons and tons of it or whatever. But like, if you want to have a nice steak dinner with your wife tonight or your boyfriend or whoever, take home a couple steaks, take home some burger, cook some burgers. Like if you want to have a barbecue this weekend, take home some burger and cook burgers. So like, as businesses, you can also help your own employees, eat some good quality beef or pork or chicken or whatever. And it costs a little bit of money. It costs, a few grand to do that, but that they can enjoy that, all throughout the entire year.
Yeah, it goes a long way.
Yeah.
And we do the same thing. I mean,
and it's not a huge thing. It's not going to change any of these guys' lives throughout
but it's
the
a
year.
nice, like we do the same thing with ranch beef where, I want our employees to, again, have that same connection and be proud of what they're doing. But it's those little things you can do, like all of those, which is hugely supportive, right? It's hugely supportive of those programs, in my opinion, give kids an opportunity to learn to care for things, have empathy. Also, like, they know the care that it takes to go in there, and then they know where it's going as well. And some people say, oh, you raise this thing and then it's going to go and get slaughtered to me. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's teaching them the supply chain, and the 4-H programs are really fantastic for, 99.99% of people aren't going to grow up on a ranch or have any connection to it. So it is a way for people who have regular day jobs to help their kids get involved and understand what farmers and ranchers are going through, understand that, your vote does matter, and that tax, that price increase for whatever it is that's increasing the feed, all that trickles down, and it just helps those kids understand. And then the process of life, my kids generally, our lives revolve around our kids pretty much. Yep. They're doing sports, they're doing their school stuff. Like our kids are, quite spoiled in that way that they've got everything they need and everything kind of revolves around them and when their next game or practice is. It's the small piece in their life that they have to have some ownership and take responsibility, that like no matter how late you're getting home from your game, you still have to stop at the bar and feed your steers.
Yep.
Or your pigs. You're tired after your football game on Saturday night, but Sunday you got to clean your pens. And you got to provide a clean place for them to live and clean water. Just this last weekend, my daughter's, had shoulder surgery, and her sister are out there cleaning out all the waters, getting ready for the new batch of steers to come in. We're just getting pens cleaned up and ready to go while the weather's nice.
Yep. It teaches them care.
It teaches them so much.
Yep. Hard work. And I tell people all the time, like, I don't know what my kids are going to ultimately do. I don't think any of us do. But I know the skill sets that they're learning coming, out of what we do at Little Belt Cattle Company, and know what my business partners' kids, like, the skill sets they learn wherever they go, that's going to be added value.
Right.
And I think, again, the connection of caring for animals, working with animals, they can't, if they're in your care, I mean, that is a huge amount of responsibility. And there's right and there's wrong. But I think kids learning that stuff today is arming them with the skills necessary to be successful adults.
Right. Well, we'll end on that. Thanks again for coming over.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
It's
It's awesome.
It was fun.